Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku became the reluctant trump card of every side? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Aizawa Shota sat at the detective's desk with a raised eyebrow as a file was plopped onto the space in front of him. Tsukachi walked back to his own side of the table and sat into his own chair with a sigh. Shota's eyebrows furrowed in suspicion as his fingers brushed the oddly thin file. He gave into his curiosities and opened the file, finding only 2 photos. One of which seemed to be a screenshot of complex code typed out. On top was a pop-up with various warnings. Most had the words, "Access breached," written all over them. The second item in the folder was an extremely blurry image of a building taken from the ground on the inside of an alleyway. It was dark out, and the little light in the image came from a faraway streetlight. On the edge of the building was half the back and a bright red sneaker of an unidentified individual. And this is the evidence I was waiting all week for? Shota raised an eyebrow, glancing away from the evidence and up towards the police officer. This one's extremely careful with sightings. We had to make an entire bank robbery setup just to get a picture of them. Not to mention we have no idea what their quirk is. If used improperly, this can get extremely out of hand. We've barely even been able to pick up on his gender. Luckily most of our witnesses slipped when referring to him though. The only people who have had close interactions were myself, the criminals, and the victims. As you know, vigilantism is not overly uncommon, but most of which are premature and easily caught. We have absolutely no idea what his next move is. He's busted about 5 drag exchanges in the last week. We're also not even counting any petty crimes as we don't even know the amount he's been involved in. It could range from 5 to 50 depending on the day. Tsukachi concluded his thorough explanation with a huff, as his eyes wandered to the picture of a single red shoe. Mid-jump from building to building. So I can assume you want him in custody as soon as possible, right? Aizawa questioned. The officer nodded. So far, he's had no real criminal offenses other than vigilantism, battery, and probable hacking, again no proof. It's difficult especially considering we have no idea what his quirk is. At the last sentence, the underground hero's head shoots up from the papers. What do you mean you have no idea what his quirk is? He practically snarled out. He typically gets the job done so quickly and efficiently that he's gone before we arrive. We didn't even know he existed until the criminals he captured ratted him out. Strangely enough, they seemed reluctant to do so. The officer trailed off in thought. So it's entirely possible that he's got a non-physical quirk? Emitter type. Aizawa asked. Well, there's another thing. If that was the case, the villains wouldn't be so battered after we find them, Tsukachi explained. The hero nodded and picked up the case file after giving the half-silhouette another once-over. I wish you luck. Who knows what he can do? The detective followed the hero to the door. Shota merely nodded sharply before exiting the office and the station altogether. A hooded figure jogs between alleys, clearly in a rush. He pulls out a phone so cracked that it barely produces any light. As his eyes dart to the time, he begins to let out a string of curse words, picking up his pace. He leapt across the alleys, maneuvering between elaborate parkour flips and acrobatics, continuing his haste until he approached a seemingly random alley and jumped. He wasn't too far into the downtown area, meaning that the buildings were an easy drop. Regardless, he sprung off the sides and got to the ground within 3 jumps. After sprinting between a few other alleys, he managed to make it to a large semi-abandoned building. As in, it was supposed to be abandoned. The hooded figure took a few steps backwards before leaping over the barbed wire fence. He once again checked his Bats hit-beaten phone before casually walking into the building. Jonathan Xavier was from America. He had just gotten a huge order of trigger. People were buzzing about his new and improved drag. He knew he'd go down in history as the man who figured out how to mass-produce it. Even if the heroes refused to touch the stuff, he'd get there. Everyone would need it. For now, he would continue his smaller deliveries with employees and his larger deliveries with himself. This would be the next big step. He was meeting up with a large gang in Japan. It took some money to get here with the cargo, but he knew that he'd get it back. For the sake of secrecy, everyone in the sketchy building was nameless. He didn't know who he was dealing with either. All he knew was that this was his big break. Jonathan was in the middle of a handshake and the pass of a briefcase before the door busted open, revealing a figure on the smaller side. The person had a simple face mask and goggles over his eyes. He was also wearing a black tight suit with a black hoodie tied around his waist. He had various tools strapped to a belt and a chrysis. A bow staff extended with a sharp slice beside him. "Hello, boys," the figure exclaimed. A voice changer covered whatever his true voice sounded like. "It's a bust." Another voice from the opposing side of the exchange shouted. The unidentified figure waited until everything erupted into chaos itself before actually stepping in. Well, in actuality all the man had to do was blink before the figure was gone. "Where'd he go?" Another voice shouted. Jonathan panicked. He ran. If someone were to count the steps he took, the man would have taken exactly 2 before everything went black. 119, what's your emergency? Hi, do you have Tsukachi over there? If this is a prank call, you can go ahead and hang up. The voice immediately deadpanned. Yeah, I got a huge trigger bust over here and where's Tsukachi? Trigger? This really is a serious topic dash. Yeah, just get some of your fuzz over here and I don't know if they're gonna stay out for long and one of them has this quirk with knives? So I'd hurry. The officer on the other end briefly sighed before there was some sort of ruckus on the other side of the phone. Another voice joined the conversation. Who is that? I don't know. Some prank caller. Talking about Trigger. The other voice groaned before he was the one operating the phone call. Vigilante. The voice huffed. Tsukachi. I just knew you'd make it. The voice cheered. Where are you? Tsukachi asked blatantly. You know that warehouse off the side of Tsuyasa Street? There? Wasn't it set for destruction last week? Apparently not. There were these plans but they were faked and I found the real ones. It was lab-led as destruction but in actuality it's not to destroy for another 3 months. There is this underground guy, I'll have more information on him soon, he keeps making fake documents dash. The supposed vigilante broke into a spur of uncatchable mutters before stopping themselves. Anyway, hurry. There's a knife guy and I don't know how long he's gonna stay down. Don't you want to stay and give us a witness statement? Tsukachi asked, attempting to sound inviting, as if he wouldn't throw him into the back of the car regardless of his statement. Yeah, no. I'm good. Busy. The line was cut. The detective sighed and looked at the responder, stepping back from the other's workspace. Get a unit over to Tisa. I'm coming with. Tsukachi walked away. The operator could almost say he was stomping. The vigilante hissed as he poked at the wound. One of the men in the warehouse managed to get a shot on him. As shitty as it was, Izuku told himself it could have been much worse, which was very much true. The bullet only barely grazed his shoulder, but it still hurt pretty badly. How rude is that? Izuku muttered to himself as he cleaned the wound while sitting on the top of a building with his medkit. He found himself in a generally safe area from any villains and heroes. As a child, he shared a dream with Kaken of being the #1 hero. That whim has all burned and died with his current life. At least he's not a full-fledged villain. He hasn't gotten a name. There have been too many suggestions and self-dubs by citizens that he just goes by that vigilante at this point. Whether or not it's out of fondness or distaste, Izuku couldn't care less. He didn't want the publicity anyway. Of course, the universe chooses to be a cruel joke anyway and makes Midoriya the newest internet sensation. Somehow the public manages even without any pictures. However, the vigilante can't play entirely innocent as he has multiple social media accounts for the sake of slandering your average local authority. He also often gets into these Twitter debates with other heroes. His favorite victim to torment is Hawks. While he does make for fantastic banter, it's best to stay behind the safety of his laptop. He doesn't exactly know what led to another, but something happened where Hawks figured out what his occupation was. He was lucky the hero didn't care enough to try and capture him. Midoriya huffed as he finished patching up his arm and replaced his jacket over his arms. He took a moment to glare at the tear in the fabric. He decided that he needed another pocket for more weapons anyway. He's been on his own for about 5 years. It was supposed to be a short trip to America with his father. It was supposed to be one where she came back. It was 3 weeks after she left when he found out about the fire. It was at least a year when he realized she wasn't coming back. Izuku began once again running among the rooftops. It felt nice to finally cut that trigger case to a close. The increased trigger usages have been proved to be a serious pain for the Vigilante. Now that he's caught the supplier, he can hopefully take a night or two to finish up breaking into those files at the police station. They changed the cybersecurity everything after last time. How annoying. His patrol ended just as the sun was coming up. He managed to stop a few small-scale bank robberies and assaults in back alleys. The rest of his night was rather lenient on him, as boring as it was. For the F of it, Izuku decided he'd post something on his Instagram. He looked over the quick picture he took of the defeated villains after they were apprehended. His photography skills are trash, but it does good when you're bored but also don't want to risk direct evidence. Obviously he moved far away before he posted it. He sat on the edge of the building and laid back as he scrolled through his busted janky-butt phone. Reminder, don't shoot people, winky face. Aizawa looked unimpressed at the cracked and blurry picture being shown to him by the detective. So, he has a social media? Yeah, never actually posts pictures of himself. Mainly random pictures and stuff like this that's so DMN blurry that only people who know what it is can really decipher anything. The officer huffed. Shoyuda opened his mouth to comment before the officer added, and no. We can't track his IP. This criminal has every encryption in the book. His phone might as well have been made before the age of quirks. The underground hero hummed in acknowledgement. Better than the 2DM and near useless hunks of evidence, I guess. The hobo said, as enthusiastic as ever. Tsukachi rose an unamused eyebrow at the constant annoyed comments from the hero. He glanced over at the thugs currently being apprehended. They were yelling something about a bow staff as they wrestled their ways to a containment vehicle. The law enforcement has been looking for this gang for a long time. Luckily for them, this trigger supplier from America was also among those caught. He went quieter than expected. Almost like he'd given up. Like he knew he never had a chance. Well, Aizawa knew he had one and he wasn't going to waste it. Based on what the captured criminals were spewing, the Vigilante probably had a pretty basic enhancement quirk. That or a stealth quirk, or a teleportation quirk. The supplier of the whole ordeal was from America. Based on his description, this wasn't just any Vigilante. How could someone disappear within a blink? Definitely teleportation. Izuku was running from everything. Running from Kaken, running from his past, running from the JRK that keeps following him around. It started at about midnight. The Vigilante had felt eyes burning into the back of his head. Even when he tried losing them, there was always a scream or cry for help, a hand reaching out that couldn't be ignored. As big of a mistake it was, Izuku couldn't force himself not to help. He continued trying to lose the eyes scraping through the back of his hood, but no matter what he did, the constant heebie-jeebies continued to crawl up his spine. Just as soon as he thought he lost the eyes, he felt them again. By now, Izuku was just finishing with his night shift and was getting pretty DMN sick of this. He just wanted to go home. But he couldn't go home until this guy got off his back. It was only when the sun came up could Izuku stop aimlessly walking around. He didn't go away until daybreak, which left Izuku aimlessly wandering the streets until he'd arrived back at his abandoned apartment. He attempted to look into the building's history at some point, but the task was neglected when he finally caught a lead on some villain he had already caught many moons ago. He probably should look into it at some point, as it would be his typical Deku luck to find the apartments happen to have some sort of death mold that would kill him within the next 3 months. The Vigilante held his chin as he muttered, walking along the alleys. He'd like to walk in the streets to see the sunrise, but Atlas, walking among civilians, required his civilian cloths. However, even those didn't count for much, as he still got awkward glances and hobo comments. He's even been offered handouts. He can't say that he didn't take them though. There was a call for help. Izuku perked up on instinct. He looked at the sky and gauged his time. He bounced on his heels anxiously, teetering from one direction to the other for only a moment until he gave in and ran. The vigilante expertly weaved through the alleys before he stopped on his heels. He arrived at a dead end of an alleyway. Inside, Izuku found nothing. Izuku turned on his heel to immediately leave before he was suddenly tackled to the ground. Gotcha! Izuku grunted as he fell to the ground, taking no time to think as he kicked his attacker over him and jumped back to his feet. His assailant was clearly inexperienced as he stumbled to his feet. Hold up, I just want to talk but Izuku's body was already moving. His foot met the other's face and in the same fluid motion, and he pinned the boy up to the wall. The other was panting as his eyes met the ones covered by his goggles. I need your help. The other breathed out, not looking away from the vigilante. The kid had a few inches on him. Izuku could recognize him from anywhere. His lips had meant to make sound, but perhaps it was for the best when he mouthed the name from behind his mask and no sound escaped. And get the F off me. You short but pervert. I should have known there would be some bullshit like this when working with a criminal. The taller's hands crackled threateningly. Izuku loosened his grip on his old friend's wrist hastily. Izuku stared at the other, his lips continued to move but no sound came out. So? You gonna help or not? The explosive blonde shot back. What exactly do you need help with? Izuku urged himself not to stutter, and luckily he managed, barely. The young vigilante scanned the surrounding area. He didn't see any bad guys. My friend. The other said simply. Context please? Izuku shrugged. Oh, for F's sake dash. The vigilante's newest encounter turned around to grumble and shove his face in his hand. You're that vigilante, right? Depends. Which one are you referring to? The smart butt comment poured from Izuku's mouth without any way to stop it. He wanted to clamp his hands over his mouth and so it shut. The taller one in response rolled his eyes. Don't get snappy with me. Besides, I'm trying to be nice here so you'll help me. That, unlike the rest of these assholes, was left unsaid. The other huffed. Fine. What do you need help with? Getting anger management therapy? Izuku crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow, despite the fact that the other probably couldn't see it. His past friend glared before taking a deep breath. I'm trying not to make this difficult because I really need this, so just stop being such a effing smartass and let me talk. The boy snapped, but was clearly still trying to hold himself back. Alright geez. Start yapping. My friend is missing. Izuku's eyebrows scrunched together. Why didn't you just go to the police? You know, instead of seeking out a possibly dangerous alleged criminal? People on the streets are pretty morally gray, you know. Well, he's been missing for a while. The police closed his case early. Izuku stepped back for a moment with a tilt of his head. How long? They don't usually close the case until there's no evidence after 7 years, but that's America, unless they think he's... Izuku trailed off, not wanting to name the worst outcome of one of Kaken's friends. He found himself suddenly getting grabbed by the HRNSS. Don't. F-I-N-G. Katsuki glared coldly. His hands began to pop, threatening to set off a real explosion. Izuku expected himself to cower, to run away back like he did in school when Katsuki would grab the straps on his backpack. He found himself glaring back up at the boy. Touch me again and I'll make sure they never find you either. Now come on. I need more info. Despite everything he has done, Izuku wouldn't find it in his heart to turn him down. Katsuki was acting so weird. He wasn't yelling as much, and there was a tremble in his voice, almost as if he knew something, but refused to believe it. Everyone keeps saying that he's dead. You know what? I don't believe it. I can feel it. He's still out there. Everyone else gave up on him. But I'm not gonna. He's just been pronounced legally dead and no other heroes are doing anything about it. They say they have better stuff to do. So I know he's out there. Besides, that twerp would survive the last quirk war without trying. That deck, he's like a cockroach. Izuku's eyes widened from behind his goggles at the other's sincerity, hidden behind his harsh words. So then why did he feel like being such a D-dash? Yeah. That's how it is, the vigilante shrugged, knowing full well that if it was one of Katsuki's friends, they probably went missing for a damn good reason. Now, can I get some actual information and not your sob story, please? I'm a busy guy dash. Katsuki sighed in relief despite the unusual harshness that had been radiating off of Izuku. There was still something bothering the Vigilante about said sob story, so despite his request a question bubbled into the air. So, why did they drop his case so early? I'm sure you know that they don't use that 7-year rule like in the US. Katsuki sighed, seemingly debating whether or not to trust his new comrade before giving in to Izuku's need for information. Doesn't have a quirk. After seeing Izuku stare off into space for quite some time, Kaken found his voice again and spoke up. And at that point, Izuku really wished he hadn't. I know what you're thinking. I thought the exact same sheet too. I wasn't but okay? I still am. I learned the hard way that a quirk isn't what makes someone heroic. I wouldn't be caught dead saying this anywhere else, so you better not say sheet, but he was more heroic than anyone IFNG knew, and if I know anything, he's still kicking and screaming Kaken, with his annoying TWK but voice. Look, just forget it. This was hopeless anyway. I know why you wouldn't want to help me. Never mind. Katsuki spun on his heel, turning the palm of his hand to his forehead, lightly jabbing as he walked away, muttering something about society being F-ed. Now, Izuku wanted to run. He didn't know when the explosive boy tackled him to the ground, or yanked him up by his crossbelts. But this scared him. Katsuki having regret of all things? Terrifying. The comment on society being F-ed up? Villainous. Which is why Izuku was so confused when his body moved before he could think. His bow staff suddenly extended out and nabbed his former friend's ankle. He tripped over the weapon and fell flat on his face. So your name is Kaken then? The word felt familiar on his tongue, but he couldn't help the slyness in his voice. Hey, what the F was that for? Katsuki jumped up and began marching towards Izuku, who leaned on his bow staff. As fun as it was to see Katsuki go through all of the things he's been through on his behalf, Izuku didn't want his former friend to go through that. He was clinging to a memory that only had a hope of a chance of still existing. And yet he still took his extended hand. Figuratively. When Izuku offered his hand towards the other to help him off the ground, he got it roughly slapped away. I came here to find that quirkless brat so my mom would stop hounding me. Not to make friends. And you're not allowed to call me that. Katsuki presumed to help himself up and brush himself off. He began walking away, out of the alley. And he is. Izuku felt his mouth quirk up at the irony. Well, I never said I wouldn't help because he's quirkless. I never even said I wouldn't help. Izuku shrugged. Who do you think I am? The police. Izuku grinned as he saw the corners of Katsuki's mouth twitch upwards. Ha. Good one. His name's Izuku Midoriya. You see what I can do. Boy, he hasn't heard that in a while. He almost felt himself get pulled out of his own body and watched the scene in third person. He felt like he was a ghost of his former self, and the ghost of Izuku was screaming at him to tell the blonde that he was here. UFING better. If you're really what they say you are, you better be DMing good, or else I'm gonna be said. If you do, who knows, I'll think of something. Probably pay you. F you. Kaken hissed out as he stomped out of the alley. However, Izuku couldn't help but notice the slight lift in his head and the loss of tenseness in his shoulders as he walked out of sight. Izuku Midoriya. One of the villain's hands tapped methodically on the bar's counter as the other ticked and stretched at the back of his own neck. He chuckled a moment before motioning for the cloud of smoke beside him to continue. It's a quirkless kid that the Vigilante is set to find. Kurogyri clarified. Tomura hummed as he continued his tapping on the counter. The other was continuing to clean glasses, despite no one other than the thin-haired man at the bar. Interesting. So, you said he had more of a hero complex, correct? Shigaraki giggled. Yes, I do believe that can make it difficult to please Sensei's wishes, Kurogyri replied. Tomura rolled his eyes. Yes, well, he is trying to save that quirkless brat. We need more people for our cause anyway. Why don't we hit 2 birds with 1 stone? If he keeps running, we'll make him come to us. Shigaraki chuckled as he scratched at the back of his neck again. Kurogiri's glowing eyes raised an eyebrow at the suggestion. We gotta find that brat first. Surely there's some resentment towards this society, being outcast by it and all. So much so it seems like he turned his back on it anyway. We got work to do. Getting that heroic vigilante on our side is our next move. Too big of one to ignore. The hero killer kills the symbols, and the vigilante kills the soul. Shigaraki was pleased. It's clear that the villains would not only gain publicity and social balances between the heroes, but this vigilante was clearly another physical resource as well. If he could only figure out how it worked. Kurogiri almost felt bad for the boy. Being born quirkless most certainly wasn't easy. Being the next target of the League of Villains definitely didn't make living any easier. Speaking of which, that did bring up another topic of conversation. How can we be so sure that this boy is still even alive? The villain asked. Playing the devil's advocate per usual, are we? The other villain leaned over the counter with a manic smile. It's like that kid said. I've just got a feeling. Shota Aizawa was scrolling away from the blurry images, seemingly taken with a cracked camera. To anyone else, it would look like random abstract forms of photography, but to Shota and the police, it was evidence. Take away the nondescript errors in the photos and they'd be looking at the faces of thugs, thieves and villains at the vigilante's mercy, minutes before the police arrive. Not to mention the online beef with pro-hero number 3, Hawks. Aizawa decided that he definitely needed to have a brief conversation with said hero, considering his blatant connection to the vigilante. After another mental debate with himself, strictly for the purpose of not going through with this as he really didn't feel like getting blinded by the energy of the guy, even if it was over text, the underground hero sends the top 3 a brief message. He didn't bother explaining the situation, just asking if they could talk and sent a screenshot of one of the vigilantes and Hawk's more recent web interactions. Bubbles almost immediately shot up after the text. The real Hawks. Shota groaned painfully at the short response. As much as the hero would love a full and scheduled response, he supposed that this was the best he was gonna get. He needed more information on the brat, and this was his next best source before he did anything rash like attempting to capture the vigilante blindly. The man groaned and flopped onto the UA high school break room's couch. School was starting in a few weeks, and he needed to finish preparations with the principal for his new batch of brats. He was almost off and had a few hours before his patrol. The more information he had, the better. For now, Eraser would need to collect information. He decided silently tracking the criminal was the next best course of action. Eraserhead was a bit more than disappointed with himself when he couldn't even find the general area the kid patrolled in until the sun was just kissing the horizon. It was only for a second, a subtle glimpse of a small hooded figure running atop the rooftop, but by the time he blinked, the person was gone, having jumped into a darkened alley. Of course, the hero rushed over to where he thought the person had disappeared, but there was no trace. He began to come up with plausible explanations for what the criminal's quirk could be. He was well aware that he'd need to be extra careful if it was a mutation quirk. He didn't even know if the person he saw was who he was looking for. Shota sighed as he turned in for the night. He went off the assumption that the person he saw was in fact the vigilante. If it was some sort of emitter type, the hero would definitely be able to easily capture the vigilante. The hard part, as the hero learned yesterday, was finding his assignment. Despite his wish for a simple enhancement quirk, Shota had a feeling it wouldn't be that easy. Not like it ever was. Izuku huffed as he flopped into his makeshift bed. It consisted of a pretty decent couch he found on the side of the road and some old pillows with some slightly newer cases. He was gathering information for most of the night. He did manage a few smaller drag busts, but that was just a complication for what he was attempting to get information on. Izuku had an entire crime board centered around an emerging group, Unknown. Izuku has been finding connections between this newer group and a small rise in crimes. He knows that they're trying to stay on the down low, but words on the street don't get brushed past his ears. And what worries Izuku is the recent fluctuation in the sudden rumors. He knows something big is coming. It doesn't help that he has no other information. He's been busy buying and selling information, all just to figure out what the hell is about to go down. Izuku's eyes drift towards the board across the room. He doesn't know what's happening. He can't control it, and that scares him. Not to mention the whole Kaken situation. When his former best friend was first in sight, he didn't know what to think. When he found out why he'd willingly searched out an unknown vigilante just to find, well, him, was when he was really lost. Izuku also had another project. He wanted to take a look-see at this year's UA applicants. It's always interesting to get a look at their quirks during its annual sports festival. Izuku just wants to see their quirks and see how effectively they use them. He also wants to see how much the students have grown. If he can get some baseline done, and maybe see some of their quirks in the practical exam, he can gauge how effective the UA teaching style was. He wasn't trying to see who his classmates could have been. If he had a quirk. He doesn't have one. That's that. The vigilante found his eyes fluttering closed, despite his efforts to think for a moment longer. He never liked sleeping. It was inconvenient to wake up every morning with a curt shout or scream. He always dreamed. They were never nice dreams. Funny enough, the nicer dreams were the cruelest. He dreamed of it before everything went wrong. Before he went wrong. Running, reaching, roaring of laughter, stabbing, screaming, searing no after. Dangers. Distinguished. Death becomes shattered. Hiding. Crying. Running. Reaching. Falling. Going. Gone. Everything. Burning. Kaken. His As expected, Izuku arose with a gasp. He grumbled as he ran a hand over his face. It doesn't matter now. He had work to do. Izuku swung his legs over the couch and stretched. He let out a satisfied hum as he immediately walked over to his crime board. Multiple low-life criminals have been heard around in the neutral zone about a recent offer that has sprung up. As disappointed as the vigilante was that he had yet to receive that offer, he wasn't expecting to have one as he leaned into the more lawful category of people on the streets. It's useful to have over 50% of said criminals in his debt. It was easy to retain information on any topic if you knew the right people. The board in front of him had multiple lengths of string wrapping around each other, all centered around a giant question mark, with plausible theories pinned to it. Most of these theories held question marks following them. The boy sighed as he sat on his bed. He finished middle school about a week ago, and it was already killing him. He took the initiative to finish up online after he crashed out one day with Kaken and had to pay the price. Izuku flopped onto his chair and fiddled with the mouse for a moment as the screen lit up. The boy needed STMLTN. Something to distract him from the current case of his own disappearance and the new villain group he has come no closer to finding. Something was off. Izuku knows the word on the street at large, but All Might was always the word on the street, so why does this time feel so wrong? After a lot of digging, Izuku learns that the normally lanky man would be taking up a teacher position at UA. It took minimal digging in the private files, and he covered his tracks easily. Izuku is all too aware of every quirk he never had. He always thought he'd become envious at some point. In his childhood he was. Never did it go anywhere past that, as Izuku found analysis more than enough. If only the teachers at Aldera agreed. The thing that really set off Izuku was that the League mainly communicated through word of mouth. This meant that he had to go out on the field to acquire information, and Kami, was that a hassle? Through this method and his knowledge of computer science? No, not hacking. He's quirkless. Laws don't apply to people like him and he refuses to believe otherwise. Izuku found that the #1 hero was working at UA. How they allowed the man into the joint without a teaching license surpassed the young vigilante. Despite this, the vigilante can't let his own personal distaste for the hero get in the way of this possible outcome that the villains are planning. He was all too well aware of the entrance exams. Kaken would be applying by now. Izuku hummed. If this new group of villains is planning something at UA, and soon, it might be logical to assume that Holy Sheik Kaken was in danger. Izuku groaned in his chair and began furiously typing. Anything. He needed to know something. Through his various contacts and information trades, he found most people involved were visited by a mist guy and another with a decay quirk. All of them refused to give out names. No matter how hard Izuku searched, he couldn't find a single database with a name for the quirk. He didn't doubt that the guy could be off records anyway, so he opted to use that on his analysis of the guy's quirk. As Izuku never met the guy, he had to use accounts from criminals. Obviously not his preferred method, but he hoped to see him in action soon. On a brighter note, Izuku was now legally dead. According to Katsuki. Which also meant he didn't have to hit a name to get into the entrance exams. The boy cringed as he leaned back into his seat. His computer was pulled up to the average scores on the entrance exams for both Hero Course students and General Education students. He also happened to find All Might's files within the teaching staff. He'd look at those later. You can't pass up dirt this good. Izuku groaned as the sun began to set. The boarded-up windows allowed specks of light to trickle through his hideout. He arched his back over the arm of his chair and folded his hands over his head. He had work to do. After researching all day and making an analysis on decay, his muscles itched to get out. Izuku couldn't help himself from being giddy as he slipped on his patrolling uniform. It's not a costume. His uniform was made up of a basic black hoodie, cargo pants with quite a few extra pockets sewn in inside and out dash, a crummy voice modulator that worked just enough to hide his voice, and 2 utility belts that he wore differently depending on how he felt that night. Sometimes he'd wear them crossing over his chest or he'd opt to put them both on his waist. Putting them on his waist was most effective, but having them strapped tightly around his body was always quieter, especially when it came down to a sound-related quirk. Today, Izuku decided to wear them crossing over his chest like a HRS. There was a lower-ranked villain going after a small support company. They usually supplied sidekicks and smaller, upcoming heroes, but they still had some extremely useful tech. He managed to get in with one of the villain's lackeys. He almost pitted the guy. They spoke about the villains craving to be a normal member of society, but the boss wouldn't let him go. Izuku distinctly remembers ordering fries and a milkshake in a sketchy but neutral-zoned bar. Izuku took in all of this information like a sponge and used what he told him to find himself where he was tonight. Izuku perched himself on top of a building, supervising a warehouse that belonged to the company. He almost pitted him. If it wasn't for the fact the guy called his boss right after their meeting, Izuku would have bothered giving him some redemption contacts. Of course, people are never that simple, so he immediately figured out that they wouldn't be attacking the company's headquarters. It was a smooth plan. Plausible in theory. Have one of their men pretend to have a sudden change of heart, fool their biggest threat into going to the wrong location, and when the Vigilante found out, they'd say that the poor villain didn't know about the change. Unluckily for the crooks, they were dealing with Midoriya Izuku. And as much as he wished to purge it from his police file, he still was the Vigilante. It was well beyond stupid to refer to him as such, considering most underground heroes didn't touch him. He hoped it would stay that way and he'd end up unscathed by the Hero Commission. Thankfully, he now knows the Commission won't be too harsh when they catch him, especially after they gave Endeavor himself a slap on the wrist for nearly turning him into a McCrispy. At most, that's what Midoriya would be getting, moreover when they find out he's quirkless. What are they gonna do? Arrest him for illegal quirk usage? They'd throw away his toys and throw him into foster care or some group home where the kid's jants never quiets, and when they weren't directed at him, he was still being punished. Not again. Izuku sighed as he continued observing the warehouse. He noted the groups taking place on the different sides of the warehouse. Just how much gear were they taking? Izuku carefully crept around the perimeter of the activity. He supposed he'd just have to get inside first. The not technically Vigilante managed to swindle his way past both the gang and the guards by jumping roof to roof. He was only fairly content with his situation when he was atop of the warehouse. I always loved surprises dash. Izuku grinned as he unscrewed a vent. He carefully lifted the grate off of the square opening and immediately lodged himself in. Izuku wondered if this was what Santa Claus felt like on Christmas Eve. In fact, he was even tempted to shout, H-O-Ho-H-O, as he fell down the vent, despite the fact it was nowhere near Christmas. Izuku fell through the ceiling with a yelp, expecting the vent to be able to hold him up. Apparently not. The force of his fall caused the vent to go crashing down under the weight of his steel-toed shoes. He couldn't tell if it was dumb luck or an even dumber inconvenience when his eyes darted to a shelf right below him. Izuku was careful to quickly grab the vent underneath him before he tumbled as silently as he could into the top, without trying to hit any of the goods that were stacked in boxes. The vigilante sighed softly in relief as he began making his way down from the top shelves. It was too cliché of a warehouse with much too valuable items for him to mess this up. He located the front door and waited. He looked down at his wrist boredly as though checking a non-existent watch. After hearing a short tussle with the guard outside, the vigilante got into position. Considering the length of the fight with the supposedly trained guard and the footsteps of only 3 people, Izuku immediately supplied himself with the knowledge of a knockout quirk. He tightened the mask on his face in case it was airborne, and the gloves around his wrists if it was skin-to-skin contact. If he wasn't wearing a mask and goggles, one would have seen a near-manic smile gripped onto his face. As the door was busted open. "Hello. Now, while I believed neither of us are supposed to be here, I would find it quite convenient if you'd leave," Izuku teased as he attempted a complex spin with his staff. He briefly fumbled around with it before it landed back into his grasp, barely hitting the ground. "Would you look at this guy?" The leader shouted, stomping up to the smaller. "And who are you supposed to be? A pipsqueak? Some wannabe hero? You know vigilantism is a crime. If you stop now, you might be able to get in a cut with us." The boss rambled on, before one of the goons nudged him. "Hey Yuroki, how'd you think the kid got in here?" His voice was laced with suspicion. Funny. I thought I had the joint surrounded. Is it your quirk, kid? Man, I would kill to have something like that. Now, you gonna stop pretending or what?" Izuku rolled his eyes and the leader's antics. If he could get the one with the knockout quirk knocked out before he kicked the bucket himself, he might be able to take the other man's lackeys that were supposedly surrounding the building. Without warning, small metal marbles clinked to the ground. The men barely had time to react before that entire section erupted in smoke. "Someone get that kid thrush!" The shout was cut off by a sickening crack. The men reacted blindly, whipping around in whichever direction they heard noise. Izuku grinned as the men began to shout towards one of themselves in particular. Izuku now knew his target. The boy snuck up behind the man, his staff connecting to the back of his neck just enough to knock him out. After this henchman's quirk was out, the rest were easily picked off. By the time the smoke cleared, the floor was scattered with still-breathing bodies. Now, Izuku had to catch as many as the criminals surrounding the warehouse as quickly as possible before the police arrived. The more silent, the better. The vigilante took a step before turning around. Just as he did, a white piece of fabric whipped past his face. He immediately skittered off to the side in order to get a better angle of his attacker. There stood a man in black with yellow goggles. A scarf was wrapped around his neck, his hands weaved with the access, controlling it with expertise. Pro underground hero, Eraserhead. Quirk, face. Izuku's brain helpfully supplied. Though he made sure to cut his train of thought off before it got any further. He needed to focus. He made sure to filter any observations he took on the hero as he stood there. His head turned into a constant highway, pushing helpful information in and out as the two stood in silence. Eraser, despite the thoughts threatening to burst from the greenette, was the first to break it. "Nice work," the hero said plainly. He still held his scarf in preparation. Izuku knew that Eraser was expecting him to run. Izuku buzzed with anxiety and excitement. Very few people have ever snuck up on him like that before, and be his favorite underground hero and compliment him. His hand reached up to the switch on his mask, double-checking that his voice modulator was turned on before speaking. Flattery appreciated, but undeserved. Izuku shrugged. He couldn't help but grin slightly as he approached the man, who stepped back warily. From Eraser's point of view, it was a smart move, considering that he didn't know what Izuku's quirk was. Eraser's quirk flared up, to Izuku's glee. He instantly began taking information in order to analyze it later. "So, you understand what you're doing here is against the law, right, kid?" Izuku tried to ease the tension in his shoulders at the man's nickname for him. He definitely wasn't an adult's height. It still spooked the vigilante a bit to know that the other was a little closer to figuring him out. Not really. Izuku shrugged again, trying to remain nonchalant despite the buzzing he felt under his skin. Eraser raised an eyebrow. As in you don't know, or vigilantism is not really illegal? Eraser blinked but only for a moment. It's not like it made a difference. Who said vigilante? Eraser rose an eyebrow and glanced meaningfully at the plethora of villains lying limp behind the boy in green. Anyhow, I believe we have more pressing matters at hand. Izuku nodded almost sarcastically. His hands clasped together and pointed towards Eraser with an exaggerated nod. As if on cue, a tsunami of voices were heard from outside of the warehouse. After repeated questioning from the people outside, the doors suddenly melted down. Izuku's mind immediately began spinning, words unintentionally spewing out of his mouth in a low mutter. Melting quirk, 3 points, drawback looks like typical overuse. Nails get darker as it's used. He's almost at his limit. It looks like it's based on surface area? Time used seems irrelevant if he's already warm out after one use. Easy takedown if he uses his quirk again, already worn out, might not need to make use of quirk. Izuku's eyes then darted to the 3 other Goonies following the one with the melting quirk. I'll take the mutant quirk. The one with the yellow mask, Kokomo Yasashii. I've seen her before. She can manifest bricks out of thin air, more than likely by using dead skin cells. Doesn't seem to have been used. The quirk you do have to worry about is Pinky over there. Izuku referred to the girl with a pink bandana covering her eyes. I don't know what her quirk is. Izuku trailed off, getting into a fighting stance. He really needed to cut that rambling habit of his. Izuku looked back at the Eraser hero and noticed he was using his quirk on him. Not an analysis quirk, huh? Noted. Eraserhead smirked slightly from under his capture weapon. Though Izuku couldn't help but notice the furrow in his brow as he turned back to the group in front of them. What are you doing here? Kokomo shouted at the vigilante. Yeah, same question actually. What are you doing out of jail? Izuku responded as though teasing an old friend. The villain rolled her eyes and began making her bricks, getting ready to throw them. After seeing her hostile state, the rest of the villains followed suit. Izuku was pinned against the brick lady, as she immediately went for him first, and made sure to lure the 2 mutants towards his side of the fight. Eraser was taking care of the melting quirk and the unknown. Izuku hoped he would be smart about erasing the unknown's quirk first, as it was unknown. However, all Izuku could do was trust and get his fight over quickly. As he knew there were at least 2 other groups on the west and eastern ends of the building. The first to attack was the burly man with the crocodile mutation quirk. He only had partial crocodile parts, such as a partially crocodile head and a tail that snapped to intimidate him. Izuku raised an unseen and unamused eyebrow. The man clearly depended on the tail trait, so Izuku made the decision to subdue that first. The next person to come up and attack was obviously the brick woman. Ah, so they weren't stupid enough to fight him one at a time. Wonderful. She already had a few bricks made and wound her arm up to toss them at him. The other mutation quirk woman was clearly inexperienced as well. She had some sort of small mammal mutation. Possibly a squirrel, as she was at least a foot or 2 shorter than he. She stood back and watched her comrades fight. Izuku dodged the bricks with ease, though he could tell Kokomo had been practicing since he last saw her. Batter up. Izuku called as he extended his staff once more. He enforced it with some high-end metal he had saved up a while for, so it should do the trick. The brick villain could only ponder in confusion as the boy swung his staff around as though hitting a baseball towards the brick. On par with the expected, the brick villain looked confused, in sync with the mutant croc. This moment was all Izuku needed to get his home run. The brick didn't get hit far because physics kind of sucks sometimes, especially for the quirkless vigilante, but it got where it needed to go. The corner of the hunk of rock got smashed into the croc mutant's tail. He yelped for a moment and winced. Obviously the villain was not incapacitated yet, so the vigilante would then knock him in the back of the neck. Kokomo groaned and face-palmed. Useless idiots, she muttered off to the side. As Izuku continued to avoid getting struck out, all the while not needing to walk any bases, he shouted baseball terms as he hit the bricks. Obviously the eraser hero felt the need to look over when the boy yelled, "Foul ball." and a cry of pain from the other mutant quirk standing off to the side. Izuku caught wind of the disapproving side eye of the eraser hero and snickered, before shortly realizing he wasn't using his quirk on the right person. Eraser, look out dash. One of the emitter-type quirks have come up and attempted to touch his shoulder. The pro hero whipped around just in time to sidestep the attack and give an approving nod to the Vigilante, who had just knocked out his final opponent. The pro and the Vigilante met back up again before Izuku began running towards the other side of the building, the eraser hero shortly following, especially if he had hopes of capturing the Vigilante when this whole mess was over. There should be two more groups, one on the north end, and the other on far south. They should have weaker quirks, so they shouldn't be a problem. As the pair made their way over, the comms on Eraserhead's wrist beeped. He must have forgotten to connect it to his earpiece. Izuku reasoned. Sending backup immediately. Both station villains and the Vigilante are on site. Eraserhead visibly cringed at the untimely reveal. Izuku kept running beside him, amused. Well, Eraser, looks like you won't be needing me for this round, huh? And with that, the Vigilante scrambled up the shelves and launched himself into the ceiling by abruptly extending his staff. The eraser hero stopped briefly, looking up at where Izuku had disappeared to, though he shook his head and continued with the task at hand as the Vigilante inevitably made his escape. Izuku ran away from the crime, fully aware that the heroes could take it from here. It's definitely not his favorite way to handle things, but if people aren't in imminent danger and his but is at risk of being arrested, it was the most logical option. Izuku took a breath as he finally hunkered down into a neutral zone. Knowledge of the place spread by mouth, and during the day, it was a family diner. It doesn't sound like a logical move, but to those on the inside, it's ingenious. The neutral zone is protected by those who respect it, and anybody who doesn't respect that is not welcome. It was just something people knew. No borderline illegal activity until after 11 at night. The Vigilante found this to be a hot spot for buying and selling information. This is where he made the most bank. With the recent topic of the new organized villain organization, Izuku found himself more commonly trading information than anything. Today was a day when he needed to actually sell what he was learning, because he was running low on yen, and he could only survive on cup soup for so long. As Izuku walked into the bar, he was greeted by various nods, glares, and stares. He was a well-known info broker in the underground, considering that the hero commission was up his butt. He likes to think that they gave up on his case, especially since he isn't trying to draw attention to himself. Hell, he doesn't even have a name. Especially since they have yet to send Hawks to assassinate him, he supposes that's a good thing too. He doubts he's good enough to survive. For now, he hopes that he's nothing more than something to send a cop or two after him. Speaking of Hawks, Izuku has an internet debate to settle with the guy. He keeps saying birds are real. Izuku hopped onto the bar stool, clearly not built for someone of his height or age. He nodded to the bartender, who didn't seem too busy at the moment, despite the crowd that Saturday nights bring in. A small one-man band played in the corner. He sang into a flimsy mic that went down just enough that it would pick up his voice if he tilted his head up at 50-degree angle at the least. This foot tapped along with the beat, triggering the bass drum next to it to let out a hollow sound. Despite the cheap material, the sound let out the kind of nostalgic energy, allowing the usually rowdy crowds to have the uncommon sense of ease around them. Those who weren't as affected by the music settled to chat quietly, even if the conversation was heated. "I take it you'd like your usual?" the bartender asked. Izuku bit his lip for a moment. He still wore his mask in these kinds of places. In fact, this is where he needs it most. The kid shuffled around in his pockets, feeling the thickness of his moth-eaten wallet. No sorry. Can't tonight. I'm just here for the gossip." Genriki Kugayaka was the name of the bartender, who nodded understandingly from the other side of the bar. It was often the case that the man was called JK, a thing Izuku found funny because of the English abbreviation of just kidding. To add to the irony, the man was one of the most stoic people Izuku has ever met. His appearance didn't draw much attention to himself, and he had a weak emitter quirk. Tell that to the guy that can make shooting soap bubbles out of one's fingers lethal. The boy constantly denied the man's self-deprecation, always having a solution to any of his problems, despite them not being verbally expressed. Izuku admired the man's quirk and honestly believes he's been holding himself back. Genriki had the ability to fix shattered glass. Now, don't get Izuku wrong, he knew it didn't sound amazing, but he knew better. Based on his observations, the bartender can pick up the glass without using his hands, melt it back together and have it transform back into a cup. Izuku believes that this is all the man wants, a cup. But the vigilante suspects some sort of heat-related quirk that has been inherited, along with something to do with glass, or even sand. If he really wanted to, Izuku doesn't doubt that the bartender could condense the glass into a nearly unbreakable weapon. And if it did break, so what? Of course the man continues to hold himself back, but if he was happy with his current life, who was Izuku to judge? Izuku spun around in his chair, surveying the bar. People were chatting amongst the heartbeat of the guitar that was playing in the back of the room. Some were ducked down in booths, their conversations being nothing more than a quiet hum, while others laughed loudly with their dates and drew attention from within the quiet of the room. Izuku managed to spot Jiren. He needed information. And Izuku needed cash. As the vigilante fiddled with his fingers, he heard the slight scruff of a plate against the bar being slid in his direction. He turned back around and found his usual basket of fries before him. Izuku's hunch almost made him look half his size. Didn't order this. The stuttering sounded odd underneath the voice changer his mask provided. Such a timid sound coming from such a well-known source. I didn't ask if you could order. I asked what you wanted. And you were eyeing up that guy's fries. Genriki shrugged before going back towards another customer who practically screamed, I work a minimum wage job on a Saturday. Izuku sent a grateful glance towards the bartender before munching on his steak fries. He hasn't eaten yesterday because again, he's running out of cash. After Izuku finished his fries, he ran through his own head, pecking for useful information. Jiren was a patron at this bar. He was extremely shady around the edges. An info broker just for the cash. At least the man was smart enough to not sell the information he got stupidly. No, serious, crimes have been traced back to him yet. When Izuku looked back over, he found that Jiren was eyeing him with the same hunger Izuku was before he got his fries. Time to trade. Izuku groaned as the sun began to set. The boarded-up windows allowed specks of light to trickle through his hideout. He arched his back over the arm of his chair and folded his hands over his head. He had work to do. After researching all day and making an analysis on decay, his muscles itched to get out. Izuku couldn't help himself from being giddy as he slipped on his patrolling uniform. It's not a costume. His uniform was made up of a basic black hoodie, cargo pants with quite a few extra pockets sewn in inside and out dash, a crummy voice modulator that worked just enough to hide his voice, and 2 utility belts that he wore differently depending on how he felt that night. Sometimes he'd wear them crossing over his chest or he'd opt to put them both on his waist. Putting them on his waist was most effective, but having them strapped tightly around his body was always quieter, especially when it came down to a sound-related quirk. Today, Izuku decided to wear them crossing over his chest like a HRS. There was a lower-ranked villain going after a small support company. They usually supplied sidekicks and smaller, upcoming heroes, but they still had some extremely useful tech. He managed to get in with one of the villain's lackeys. He almost pitted the guy. They spoke about the villain's craving to be a normal member of society, but the boss wouldn't let him go. Izuku distinctly remembers ordering fries and a milkshake in a sketchy but neutral-zoned bar. Izuku took in all of this information like a sponge and used what he told him to find himself where he was tonight. Izuku perched himself on top of a building, supervising a warehouse that belonged to the company. He almost pitted him. If it wasn't for the fact the guy called his boss right after their meeting, Izuku would have bothered giving him some redemption contacts. Of course, people are never that simple, so he immediately figured out that they wouldn't be attacking the company's headquarters. It was a smooth plan. Plausible in theory. Have one of their men pretend to have a sudden change of heart, fool their biggest threat into going to the wrong location, and when the vigilante found out, they'd say that the poor villain didn't know about the change. Unluckily for the crooks, they were dealing with Midoriya Izuku. And as much as he wished to purge it from his police file, he still was the Vigilante. It was well beyond stupid to refer to him as such, considering most underground heroes didn't touch him. He hoped it would stay that way and he'd end up unscathed by the Hero Commission. Thankfully, he now knows the Commission won't be too harsh when they catch him, especially after they gave Endeavor himself a slap on the wrist for nearly turning him into a McCrispy. At most, that's what Midoriya would be getting, moreover when they find out he's quirkless. What are they gonna do? Arrest him for illegal quirk usage? They'd throw away his toys and throw him into foster care or some group home where the kid's jants never quiets, and when they weren't directed at him, he was still being punished. Not again. Izuku sighed as he continued observing the warehouse. He noted the groups taking place on the different sides of the warehouse. Just how much gear were they taking? Izuku carefully crept around the perimeter of the activity. He supposed he'd just have to get inside. First, the not technically vigilante managed to swindle his way past both the gang and the guards by jumping roof to roof. He was only fairly content with his situation when he was atop of the warehouse. I always loved surprises dash. Izuku grinned as he unscrewed a vent. He carefully lifted the grate off of the square opening and immediately lodged himself in. Izuku wondered if this was what Santa Claus felt like on Christmas Eve. In fact, he was even tempted to shout, H-O-Ho-H-O, as he fell down the vent, despite the fact it was nowhere near Christmas. Izuku fell through the ceiling with a yelp, expecting the vent to be able to hold him up. Apparently not. The force of his fall caused the vent to go crashing down under the weight of his steel-toed shoes. He couldn't tell if it was dumb luck or an even dumber inconvenience when his eyes darted to a shelf right below him. Izuku was careful to quickly grab the vent underneath him before he tumbled as silently as he could into the top, without trying to hit any of the goods that were stacked in boxes. The vigilante sighed softly in relief as he began making his way down from the top shelves. It was too cliché of a warehouse with much too valuable items for him to mess this up. He located the front door and waited. He looked down at his wrist boredly as though checking a non-existent watch. After hearing a short tussle with the guard outside, the vigilante got into position. Considering the length of the fight with the supposedly trained guard and the footsteps of only 3 people, Izuku immediately supplied himself with the knowledge of a knockout quirk. He tightened the mask on his face in case it was airborne, and the gloves around his wrists if it was skin-to-skin contact. If he wasn't wearing a mask and goggles, one would have seen a near-manic smile gripped onto his face as the door was busted open. Hello. Now, while I believed neither of us are supposed to be here, I would find it quite convenient if you'd leave. Izuku teased as he attempted a complex spin with his staff. He briefly fumbled around with it before it landed back into his grasp, barely hitting the ground. Would you look at this guy? The leader shouted, stomping up to the smaller. And who are you supposed to be? A pipsqueak? Some wannabe hero? You know vigilantism is a crime. If you stop now, you might be able to get in a cut with us. The boss rambled on, before one of the goons nudged him. Hey Yuroki, how'd you think the kid got in here? His voice was laced with suspicion. Funny. I thought I had the joint surrounded. Is it your quirk kid? Man, I would kill to have something like that. Now, you gonna stop pretending or what? Izuku rolled his eyes at the leader's antics. If he could get the one with the knockout quirk knocked out before he kicked the bucket himself, he might be able to take the other man's lackeys that were supposedly surrounding the building. Without warning, small metal marbles clinked to the ground. The men barely had time to react before that entire section erupted in smoke. Someone get that kid thrush. The shout was cut off by a sickening crack. The men reacted blindly, whipping around in whichever direction they heard noise. Izuku grinned as the men began to shout towards one of themselves in particular. Izuku now knew his target. The boy snuck up behind the man, his staff connecting to the back of his neck just enough to knock him out. After this henchman's quirk was out, the rest were easily picked off. By the time the smoke cleared, the floor was scattered with still-breathing bodies. Now, Izuku had to catch as many as the criminals surrounding the warehouse as quickly as possible before the police arrived. The more silent, the better. The vigilante took a step before turning around. Just as he did, A white piece of fabric whipped past his face. He immediately skittered off to the side in order to get a better angle of his attacker. There stood a man in black with yellow goggles. A scarf was wrapped around his neck, his hands weaved with the axis, controlling it with expertise. Underground hero, Eraserhead. Quirk, this. Izuku's brain helpfully supplied. Though he made sure to cut his train of thought off before it got any further. He needed to focus. He made sure to filter any observations he took on the hero as he stood there. His head turned into a constant highway, pushing helpful information in and out as the two stood in silence. Eraser, despite the thoughts threatening to burst from the greenette, was the first to break it. Nice work, the hero said plainly. He still held his scarf in preparation. Izuku knew that Eraser was expecting him to run. Izuku buzzed with anxiety and excitement. Very few people have ever snuck up on him like that before, and be his favorite underground hero and compliment him. His hand reached up to the switch on his mask, double-checking that his voice modulator was turned on before speaking. Flattery appreciated, but undeserved. Izuku shrugged. He couldn't help but grin slightly as he approached the man, who stepped back warily. From Eraser's point of view, it was a smart move, considering that he didn't know what Izuku's quirk was. Eraser's quirk flared up, to Izuku's glee. He instantly began taking information in order to analyze it later. So, you understand what you're doing here is against the law, right, kid? Izuku tried to ease the tension in his shoulders at the man's nickname for him. He definitely wasn't an adult's height. It still spooked the Vigilante a bit to know that the other was a little closer to figuring him out. Not really. Izuku shrugged again, trying to remain nonchalant despite the buzzing he felt under his skin. Eraser raised an eyebrow. As in you don't know, or vigilantism is not really illegal? Eraser blinked but only for a moment. It's not like it made a difference. Who said vigilante? Eraser rose an eyebrow and glanced meaningfully at the plethora of villains lying limp behind the boy in green. Anyhow, I believe we have more pressing matters at hand. Izuku nodded almost sarcastically. His hands clasped together and pointed towards Eraser with an exaggerated nod. As if on cue, a tsunami of voices were heard from outside of the warehouse. After repeated questioning from the people outside, the doors suddenly melted down. Izuku's mind immediately began spinning, words unintentionally spewing out of his mouth in a low mutter. Melting quirk, 3 points, drawback looks like typical overuse. Nails get darker as it's used. He's almost at his limit. It looks like it's based on surface area. Time used seems irrelevant if he's already warm out after one use. Easy takedown if he uses his quirk again, already worn out, might not need to make use of quirk. Izuku's eyes then darted to the 3 other Goonies following the one with the melting quirk. I'll take the mutant quirk. The one with the yellow mask, Kokomo Yasashii. I've seen her before. She can manifest bricks out of thin air, more than likely by using dead skin cells. Doesn't seem to have been used. The quirk you do have to worry about is Pinky over there. Izuku referred to the girl with a pink bandana covering her eyes. I don't know what her quirk is. Izuku trailed off, getting into a fighting stance. He really needed to cut that rambling habit of his. Izuku looked back at the Eraser hero and noticed he was using his quirk on him. Not an analysis quirk, huh? Noted. Eraserhead smirked slightly from under his capture weapon. Though Izuku couldn't help but notice the furrow in his brow as he turned back to the group in front of them. What are you doing here? Kokomo shouted at the Vigilante. Yeah, same question actually. What are you doing out of jail? Izuku responded as though teasing an old friend. The villain rolled her eyes and began making her bricks, getting ready to throw them. After seeing her hostile state, the rest of the villains followed suit. Izuku was pinned against the brick lady, as she immediately went for him first, and made sure to lure the 2 mutants towards his side of the fight. Eraser was taking care of the melting quirk and the unknown. Izuku hoped he would be smart about erasing the unknown's quirk first as it was unknown. However, all Izuku could do was trust and get his fight over quickly, as he knew there were at least 2 other groups on the west and eastern ends of the building. The first to attack was the burly man with the crocodile mutation quirk. He only had partial crocodile parts, such as a partially crocodified head and a tail that snapped to intimidate him. Izuku raised an unseen and unamused eyebrow. The man clearly depended on the tail trait, so Izuku made the decision to subdue that first. The next person to come up and attack was obviously the brick woman. Ah, so they weren't stupid enough to fight him one at a time. Wonderful. She already had a few bricks made and wound her arm up to toss them at him. The other mutation quirk woman was clearly inexperienced as well. She had some sort of small mammal mutation. Possibly a squirrel, as she was at least a foot or two shorter than he. She stood back and watched her comrades fight. Izuku dodged the bricks with ease, though he could tell Kokomo had been practicing since he last saw her. Batter up. Izuku called as he extended his staff once more. He enforced it with some high-end metal he had saved up a while for, so it should do the trick. The brick villain could only ponder in confusion as the boy swung his staff around as though hitting a baseball towards the brick. On par with the expected, the brick villain looked confused in sync with the mutant croc. This moment was all Izuku needed to get his home run. The brick didn't get hit far because physics kind of sucks sometimes, especially for the quirkless vigilante, but it got where it needed to go. The corner of the hunk of rock got smashed into the croc mutant's tail. He yelped for a moment and winced. Obviously the villain was not incapacitated yet, so the vigilante would then knock him in the back of the neck. Kokomo groaned and face-palmed. "Useless idiots," she muttered off to the side. As Izuku continued to avoid getting struck out, all the while not needing to walk any bases, he shouted baseball terms as he hit the bricks. Obviously the eraser hero felt the need to look over when the boy yelled, "Foul ball," and a cry of pain from the other mutant quirk standing off to the side. Izuku caught wind of the disapproving side eye of the eraser hero and snickered, before shortly realizing he wasn't using his quirk on the right person. Eraser lookout dash. One of the emitter-type quirks have come up and attempted to touch his shoulder. The pro hero whipped around just in time to sidestep the attack and give an approving nod to the vigilante, who had just knocked out his final opponent. The pro and the vigilante met back up again before Izuku began running towards the other side of the building, the eraser hero shortly following, especially if he had hopes of capturing the vigilante when this whole mess was over. There should be two more groups, one on the north end, and the other on far south. They should have weaker quirks, so they shouldn't be a problem. As the pair made their way over, the comms on Eraserhead's wrist beeped. He must have forgotten to connect it to his earpiece. Izuku reasoned. Sending backup immediately. Both station villains and the vigilante are on site. Eraserhead visibly cringed at the untimely reveal. Izuku kept running beside him, amused. "Well, Eraser, looks like you won't be needing me for this round, huh?" And with that, the vigilante scrambled up the shelves and launched himself into the ceiling by abruptly extending his staff. The eraser hero stopped briefly, looking up at where Izuku had disappeared to, though he shook his head and continued with the task at hand as the vigilante inevitably made his escape. Izuku ran away from the crime, fully aware that the heroes could take it from here. It's definitely not his favorite way to handle things, but if people aren't in imminent danger and his but is at risk of being arrested, it was the most logical option. Izuku took a breath as he finally hunkered down into a neutral zone. Knowledge of the place spread by mouth, and during the day, it was a family diner. It doesn't sound like a logical move, but to those on the inside, it's ingenious. The neutral zone is protected by those who respect it, and anybody who doesn't respect that is not welcome. It was just something people knew. No borderline illegal activity until after 11 at night. The vigilante found this to be a hotspot for buying and selling information. This is where he made the most bank. With the recent topic of the new organized villain organization, Izuku found himself more commonly trading information than anything. Today was a day when he needed to actually sell what he was learning, because he was running low on yen and he could only survive on cup soup for so long. As Izuku walked into the bar, he was greeted by various nods, glares, and stares. He was a well-known info broker in the underground considering that the Hero Commission was up his butt. He likes to think that they gave up on his case, especially since he isn't trying to draw attention to himself. Hell, he doesn't even have a name. Especially since they have yet to send Hawks to assassinate him, he supposes that's a good thing too. He doubts he's good enough to survive. For now, he hopes that he's nothing more than something to send a cop or two after him. Speaking of hawks, Izuku has an internet debate to settle with the guy. He keeps saying birds are real. Izuku hopped onto the bar stool, clearly not built for someone of his height or age. He nodded to the bartender who didn't seem too busy at the moment, despite the crowd that Saturday nights bring in. A small one-man band played in the corner. He sang into a flimsy mic that went down just enough that it would pick up his voice if he tilted his head up at 50-degree angle at the least. This foot tapped along with the beat, triggering the bass drum next to it to let out a hollow sound. Despite the cheap material, the sound let out the kind of nostalgic energy, allowing the usually rowdy crowds to have the uncommon sense of ease around them. Those who weren't as affected by the music settled to chat quietly, even if the conversation was heated. "I take it you'd like your usual?" the bartender asked. Izuku bit his lip for a moment. He still wore his mask in these kinds of places. In fact, this is where he needs it most. The kid shuffled around in his pockets, feeling the thickness of his moth-eaten wallet. No sorry. Can't tonight. I'm just here for the gossip." Genariki Kugoyaka was the name of the bartender who nodded understandingly from the other side of the bar. It was often the case that the man was called JK, a thing Izuku found funny because of the English abbreviation of just kidding. To add to the irony, the man was one of the most stoic people Izuku has ever met. His appearance didn't draw much attention to himself, and he had a weak emitter quirk. Tell that to the guy that can make shooting soap bubbles out of one's fingers lethal. The boy constantly denied the man's self-deprecation, always having a solution to any of his problems, despite them not being verbally expressed. Izuku admired the man's quirk and honestly believes he's been holding himself back. Genariki had the ability to fix shattered glass. Now, don't get Izuku wrong, he knew it didn't sound amazing, but he knew better. Based on his observations, the bartender can pick up the glass without using his hands, melt it back together and have it transform back into a cup. Izuku believes that this is all the man wants, a cup. But the Vigilante suspects some sort of heat-related quirk that has been inherited, along with something to do with glass, or even sand. If he really wanted to, Izuku doesn't doubt that the bartender could condense the glass into a nearly unbreakable weapon. And if it did break, so what? Of course the man continues to hold himself back, but if he was happy with his current life, who was Izuku to judge? Izuku spun around in his chair, surveying the bar. People were chatting amongst the heartbeat of the guitar that was playing in the back of the room. Some were ducked down in booths, their conversations being nothing more than a quiet hum, while others laughed loudly with their dates and drew attention from within the quiet of the room. Izuku managed to spot Jiren. He needed information. And Izuku needed cash. As the Vigilante fiddled with his fingers, he heard the slight scruff of a plate against the bar being slid in his direction. He turned back around and found his usual basket of fries before him. Izuku's hunch almost made him look half his size. Toga didn't order this." The stuttering sounded odd underneath the voice changer his mask provided. Such a timid sound coming from such a well-known source. "I didn't ask if you could order. I asked what you wanted. And you were eyeing up that guy's fries." Genariki shrugged before going back towards another customer who practically screamed, "I work a minimum wage job on a Saturday." Izuku sent a grateful glance towards the bartender before munching on his steak fries. He hasn't eaten yesterday because again, he's running out of cash. After Izuku finished his fries, he ran through his own head, pecking for useful information. Jiren was a patron at this bar. He was extremely shady around the edges. An info broker just for the cash. At least the man was smart enough to not sell the information he got stupidly. No, serious, crimes have been traced back to him yet. When Izuku looked back over, he found that Jiren was eyeing him with the same hunger Izuku was before he got his fries. Time to trade. Izuku hopped into the old rolling chair he had found on the roadside before opening up his laptop. It should have been barely functioning, but Izuku made it work. Izuku managed to swindle a few pieces of information out of Jiren while also gaining some cash. He was clearly trying to get onto Izuku's good side, but for what, Izuku had no idea. The man did let it slip that the villains involved with the attack still had no information, which was a relief considering a short notice wouldn't go over well with any followers this new group had. He opened up his latest Twitter, changed, X, post on one tab before opening another. He quickly typed out a small rebuttal before opening up some police files. The real talks. How would birds not exist if I exist? Izuku scoffed and closed the message as he continued digging through some police files. He had a collection of names of people who were pronounced dead, and their bodies were never found. The people he talked to slipped up enough by telling Izuku the villain's gender, so he could firmly cross off half the people on his list. The real talks. Also, don't you think they're a little too cool to be made by human technology? Izuku's hands twitched as he scoffed before changing tabs. Soons. That's BS technology is actually really advanced. I can make a fake bird bet. Izuku switched back to his original tab on missing persons. It was odd. None of them matched the quirk described. The only quirk that came close to what this quirk was is dissolve. It belonged to a man in his 40s who died from a particularly brutal medical phenomenon where his quirk stopped working before his heart exploded in his own chest. But that happened at least 50 years ago. Izuku doubted such a medical phenomenon was possible without the use of a quirk. A missing quirk? Not Izuku's favorite sign in a world where rumors of Japan's underground boogeyman were afoot. Izuku groaned into his chair. He was so screwed. The real talks. Why? You can't make a bird this cool. See attachment. Izuku clicked on the selfie of Hawks. He was pointing to himself as he stood on the top of a building, his wings spread almost enough to hide the background entirely, but not quite enough to block out the raven-haired pro-hero in the background who was glaring at the camera. The real talks. So where in the world are you, Vig Dash? Izuku slammed his laptop closed before he could even finish reading the sentence. He considered himself a fast reader, so the fact that he managed to close the laptop before he finished was rather impressive, if not for the fact that Hawks just suggested he was looking for him with Eraserhead. Phew. Izuku let out a string of curses as he ran his fingers through his hair, not daring enough to check his computer again. He decided to keep his laptop closed for a few minutes before gaining enough courage to close the tab. Izuku had no idea what he was going up against from both sides at this point. The boy knew he was screwed, but he didn't know how screwed he was. He should have known Hawks was being pushy in his responses. On the bright side, Izuku finally had something to do tomorrow. Aizawa Shoyuta released the final criminal from his capture scarf and watched as the officers placed quirk-restricting cuffs and shoved the criminals into the police cars. The man ran a hand over his face as he turned on his heel, his head whipping towards the detective who stood off to the side. You didn't tell me he was a kid. Shoyuta spat. The detective looked taken aback, though an eyebrow raised in confusion. The vigilante, Shoyuta clarified, is a kid. The detective's face shifted and his head tilted in slight confusion. Most are, then his eyes narrowed in realization. Wait, how old is he? The hero sighed at the detective in front of him. He's no older than 15, Tsukachi. Aizawa sighed, rubbing his temples. He could tell in the drop of the detective's shoulders that he clearly expected someone a lot older. Not some kid who barely even passed middle school yet. The kid had his face covered and he had a voice changer on. There would have been no other way to tell. His small stature could have been a quirk factor. No, Shoyuta knew. He saw a student in that boy. A child. He's just a kid. What do I do? Shoyuta leaned against the police car. I don't see how. He's been active for 2 years, that we know of. Tsukachi knew he was right, it was written all over his face, but Kami, was it so much easier to deny it? What did I sign up for? Shoyuta trailed off. You owe me so much coffee after this. Shoyuta rode in the passenger seat of Tsukachi's cruiser to the station. Shoyuta took a brief hour filling out the necessary paperwork before a message tinged on his phone. The man had only recently downloaded the social media app for the sake of work under a random name. He was pleased to see that Hawks responded to the message. I love that brat, meet me up on that building W, the soda sign with the creepy guy on it on that one street with the good ramen place. Do you want ramen? Shuta's eyebrows furrowed as he sighed into his hands. The hero quickly finished up his paperwork and adjusted his scarf before heading out of the building. The area Hawks chose was peaceful. No crime in sight, though Shoyuta had a sneaking suspicion that it had something to do with the number 2 hero being in the area. Shuta's feet touched the rooftop with complete silence, seeing the number 2 hero waiting patiently for the other. Hawk's wings spread out as he turned around with a lax grin. Eraserhead. Fancy seeing you here. You invited me. Want some ramen? This place is pretty good. The daylight hero waved a takeout bowl temptingly in front of him. No thank you. I'm here to talk about Aizawa raised his eyebrows meaningfully at the winged man. Oh, that dude. Not like I know him personally or anything, but he's fun. I like that guy. Hawks commented with a nonchalant shrug while stuffing his face. Have you ever met him? Aizawa stepped closer, his voice lowering. No? He raised an eyebrow, wondering what the underground hobo was getting at. He's a kid. Hawk's eyes widened but no other reaction was shown. Like, me kid or, Hawks trailed off, making a motion with his hands that suggested a person with a smaller stature. Aizawa simply nodded in response. I don't think he's any more than 15. The underground hero grumbled. I knew he was a little sheet, but I didn't think he was that little of a sheet, Hawks muttered with furrowed eyebrows. So, I've seen some of your chats. Think you can tell me anything about him? The younger hero had his back turned briefly with his wings up. Aizawa heard the click of a picture. The kid's careful. I don't think I can give you anything useful on him, Hawks paused thoughtfully. I'm not saying I'll help you catch him, but I'll keep an eye out for ya, yeah? Aizawa nodded before Hawks turned around. See it around ya? Hawks's wings spread briefly before he bulleted off into the sky, leaving the dust swirling across the roof in his wake. Shoyuta stood for a moment with an unimpressed expression. Izuku's face had a near-maniac grin on it as he compiled his notebooks. Today was the day of the UA entrance exams. He already had pages with the students' quirks written in and blank ones in between. He was careful to encrypt any harmful information, but so far, he only had the quirk name and function to deal with and questions that would be answered with observations. After he prepped at least 2 notebooks with the students, he provided more pages for some over others, as he already had an idea about who would get in. He also really wanted to see some of the videos from the recommended students. He can only bet that some of them have some really amazing quirks, though what he really wants to see is how they use them. Izuku is most concerned about the boy who was presumably recommended by the Endeavor himself. Izuku was stalling until the last second to hack into UA's cameras. Izuku knew the notorious principal would be making security checks before the exam, so he'd try and log in at the last second while the principal was busy watching. He would also have to be careful of the security measures the hero probably had placed. Izuku knew he'd miss at least a little bit of the practical exam with the time it'd take to not trigger anything that would notify the rat of his presence. Despite having these workarounds, Izuku knew he'd have enough time to see what all of the possible students were made of. Izuku has determined that the villains don't actually know what they're planning, so Kaken and the others would be relatively safe. Because UA hasn't officially started classes yet, no one knew the whereabouts, and according to Izuku's sources, those involved haven't gotten any info yet either. It'd be an awfully short notice to announce the attack right now. The unprofessionalism would tarnish this new villain group's name before it even started. The Vigilante just finished writing names on his watch list when the time of the practical exam arrived. Izuku planned on using his laptop to record all exam sites so he could look at it later. While it was happening, he would flip through each exam site and get what information he could while it was live. The Greennet started hacking about 3 minutes before the exam. Despite the early start, Izuku knew he wouldn't be able to get linked to the feed until at least 2 minutes into the exam itself. He found his fingers clattering on the keyboard and weaving through the firewalls. He wouldn't say it was easy, but it was definitely easier than he thought it would be. The challenge excited him and defied his only recently required skill. The loops in code, each one was different and got harder as he passed each firewall. About 4 minutes into the exam, Izuku finally managed to connect to the UA network. He scrambled for his notebook and screen recorded the live feed on a different tab. He instantly began going through the recordings of those students on his watch list and scribbling down the applications of their quirks. And if Izuku spent over half his time adding to the already 4 halves full of a notebook, Who would ever know? He could always watch the other students later. Katsuki yelled some sort of profanity as he pushed another examinee out of the way, just as the three-pointer's metal claws wedged itself in the ground where the eye-bagged freak was once standing. Bakugo Katsuki was just mad. He felt every fiber of his being shake with anger until it rattled his core and everyone else around him. That DMN nerd isn't here. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be here. This bottled-up situation was spewing out of Katsuki in the best way possible, in the form of explosions, rescues, and points. He had more than enough points to pass, and he was only 6 minutes in. He didn't understand how so many of these extras could get in the way so easily. It set him off, though he supposed it would help bring a little bit of Deku with him in spirit. Katsuki hooped as he clambered on top of the robot and exploded its head. He jumped down panting heavily. If he were some sort of animal, he'd have gotten the control called a long time ago, based on the foaming from the mouth. Where was his head was spinning from it. A hand clamped down on his shoulder. Katsuki did not jump at the contact, he just froze up a little, that's it. He immediately glared at the hand's owner, finding an extremely lanky kid with some of the most horrendous eye bags he's ever seen. "Hey man, are you alright?" Katsuki so graciously responded by swiping off the hand. "I'm fine, Iba dash," and then his mind went blank. "Let's just breathe like that for a minute, yeah? I'm not gonna get in regardless, and you clearly have yourself handled. You won't if you keep going like this. It's not right. My name is Shinso Hitoshi. Quirk, brainwash. I want to be a hero, but I haven't gotten a single point stacked up. Never had the quirk for it. Thanks for saving me, I'm gonna start heading back to the gate. Maybe I'll see you at the sports festival if I even get in." The purple-haired lanky boy began walking away as Katsuki found he could move himself again. It felt like his body just had an entire reset. While he was under, all of his thoughts went blank, and all of his brewing anger vanished. The worst part? Bags was right. He was being reckless. Not the hero Izuku thought of him as. No, he nearly hurt Hitoshi or whatever his name was by trying to snag those extra points. It was a bad call. If this med test ran on save points, I'd be sheet that FANG Deku could have gotten in instead of me. Wait a DMN minute. His body moved before he could think. "Oh no, the hell you're not, eye bags." Katsuki roughly grabbed the other's arm, despite his freakish tallness, and began dragging him back towards the exam. "Hey Dash, what the hell do you think you're doing? I helped you right, seriously." At this point, Shinso gave up, sounding dejected. "Look, I know my quirk is bad, alright? But we really don't have to do this now. It's the middle of the exam and there are probably cameras everywhere." Bakugo froze. This idiot thought he was gonna kick his butt. Like Deku. Bakugo turned sharply towards the other. "Listen up, eyebags. You're not giving up that easily. This test is a total shithole and we only have a few minutes left. If I can get all the points I need in 2 minutes, you might just be able to catch up, and you've already got a head start." Katsuki didn't skip a beat as he began dragging the other towards the chaos again. What are you talking about? I haven't destroyed a single bot." Shinso growled out, still trying to tug his hand away. "I don't have a chance. I never had a chance." Katsuki finally got where he needed to be. Well, sometimes it's not about destroying sheet. Sometimes it's not about FANG beating people up and sheet. Sometimes it's about FANG saving people and not FANG dashta. Katsuki stopped himself before the image of a certain nerd appeared from behind his eyelids. "Okay? And?" Shinso raised an eyebrow. "It's a FANG long shot, but this exam is a sheet show. Clearly they expect more future heroes to actually help, because look around." Katsuki gestured to the mass destruction brought about by the exam. "These kids needed help. Now stop FING gawking. You don't have a lot of time and I don't have a whole lot of patience. Hurry up. Ain't losing my first spot for nothing, eye bags." Shinso's eyes widened for a moment before nodding to save some of the other examinees. He didn't want to steal all the points for the guy, but some of the other kids were in really bad shape, and this one guy was just walking around like a DMN drunkard. Katsuki approached almost cautiously. "Oh, hey, it's explosive guy. You was yelling earlier, right?" "Yeah. Katsuki scoffed. Quirk overused. Come on. Sit your butt down. Katsuki reluctantly allowed the yellow-haired boy to lean on him. Let's hope you've got enough points cause I think you're done for the day dash. Explosion dude. It's Bakugo Katsuki, eyebags. Look. Shinso pointed further up the street towards a rumbling giant, rolling along the pavement as though taking a jaunt in the park, and not threatening the livelihood of at least the 100 kids in their areas. Katsuki groaned, and made sure the blonde he'd hauled was in a safe spot before hauling but over to the purple-haired boy. And here I thought they couldn't make this any more kid-friendly. Shinso uttered beside himself. It's like they wanted to make our parents hand over custody after seeing how f***ing legal this is. Katsuki suppressed the way the corner of his mouth quirked up, threatening to grin. He much more willingly rose an eyebrow at the purple-haired boy, gesturing towards where the sea of students were running from. Shinso shrugged and made his way over towards the robot with Bakugo. Katsuki sneered as other kids rushed past them, leaving others in the giant robot's path. Shinso! Katsuki hollered to the tallest of the examinees. What? Shinso hollered back, releasing his brainwashing quirk from another kid. They seemed to have been panicking as they weren't physically injured. The boy quickly thanked him before running off. Hitoshi took only a moment to look wide-eyed at the guy before turning back to Bakugo. We need to take this thing out. These Enya extras are too damn stuck up so far up their own buttes they can't do it themselves. Shinso nodded. Help! A voice cried out from almost right under the robot's wheel. The two boys' heads jerked towards the noise. Sheet! There was a girl trapped under some of the other rubble dropped by the Goliath of a robot. So safe. Not the time, eyebags. A pitter-pattering of concrete was heard as another kid, he was also one of the kids who was yelling in the auditorium earlier. He sped towards them and landed in a bow almost to his knees. I am Tenya Ida, and I owe you my greatest apologies. My judgment has been clouded by my own fear. You have taught me that dash. Yeah. Shut your trap, we don't have time for your sappy sheet, what do you want? Katsuki shoved a fisted hand on top of Ida's head, who shot up in discomfort. What do you two need? Ida asked, though it was clearly somewhat forced. Before Katsuki could yell at the stick up his butt anymore, Shinso butted in. There's a girl trapped underneath that rubble right there, we've got to save her and stop the super safe and legal robot before it can get to anyone else. On it. Ida did a salad of sorts before speeding off towards the fallen examinee. Bakugo, I'll grab someone to help Ida get the rubble off of her. There's no chance he can do it with speed alone. Shinso ran off towards where the rest of the examinees were retreating. I think you know what to do. Katsuki's head craned towards the monstrous task before him, but then the people right underneath it. He'd say that he thought for a moment. That he took a deep breath before firing off towards the DMN thing, but he really didn't. The sweat from his hands exploded as he pelleted at the robot's head. Katsuki flew up to the top of the robot and looked down. He watched as Shinso got pushed and shoved aside as he desperately tried to find someone who could help lift the ruble off of the girl trapped below him. He only got a few hesitant glances before the examinees started running again. Pathetic, Katsuki glared at the backs of their heads, committing at least that to memory, because if any of these extras got into the UA hero course, he'd make sure they'd know at least he didn't think they belonged. Katsuki cuffed his hands around his mouth. Hey loser, you got your quirk for a reason. Use it. Shinso was the only one that looked back at him before curtly nodding and running alongside a rather bulky-looking boy. Clearly signs of a strength enhancement quirk. Katsuki observed, but would never admit aloud. The two only exchanged a few strings of words before Shinso managed to convince the guy to help. Now it was Katsuki's turn. The boy exploded into the zero-pointer's head. Kami, I can't believe I'm not even getting any diamond points for this. He growled as he began exploding things at random from within the robot's head. He can't say he didn't at least have fun with it. He could only hope the robot looked like it came down with a case of measles after it stopped moving, thanks to the explosion causing the metals to meld around his hand. Katsuki continued to destroy the DMN thing. Yeah, eyebags, I know it's not moving anymore. That's not the point. He only rocketed down from the robot when the timer for the exam was complete. Hopefully that Ida guy didn't hack up more points while he was busy. His palms crackled one last time as his feet touched the ground. There he saw Shinso asking the pink-cheeked girl some questions, who was leaning against Ida. The girl perked up as soon as she saw Katsuki. "Oh, your quirk is so powerful. It's no wonder you can take down such a large robot all by yourself. Thank you so much for saving me." The girl did a half-butted bow, but only because she was clearly favoring one foot over the other. Katsuki rolled his eyes. "Yeah, pink cheeks. You just made me miss out on a ton of points is all." He grumbled. Ida glared. "I must say that is very rude. Your possible classmate is complimenting and giving you gratitude, and all you do is dash. Shut it for eyes." Eyebags looked between the two of them and sighed before whispering something to the injured girl, who raised an eyebrow but nodded. Katsuki's eyes furrowed at the interaction, causing him to turn towards them right as Shinso opened his mouth. "Can you hero wannabes do anything other than fight?" Shinso lent a hand to Uraraka and let her use him to support her weight. "Who are you calling a wannabe, Eyebags?" Yes, I must commend that response, despite the wayward why use such language when we were just convulsing pleasantly just a few moments ago? Both Katsuki's and Ida's eyes went blank as their mouths clamped shut. The girl suppressed a surprised snort of laughter as Shinso glared almost distasteful at the two. "Shut up." Hitoshi began walking with Uraraka towards the recovery girl as Katsuki regained control of his body. "Don't run away from me, Eyebags. We aren't done yet." Katsuki tried to run after the purple-haired freak, but his upper arms were grabbed from underneath by Tenya. This type of violence is unbecoming of future heroes. Shinso is right. I do hope he makes it into the hero course with us with such a refined quirk. However, I believe he must survive the end of exams prior to that. Katsuki squirmed out of Ida's grip to glare, but then looked back at the tired-looking teen. Ida was right about that. He does have an impressive quirk. Something that Dmed Nerd would fanboy over, I bet. Something that Dmed Nerd would fanboy over, I bet. Kaken is so cool. He's going to be such an amazing hero. Izuku hooped as he punched his fist into the air, holding his notebook against his chest. He spun in his chair for a few moments as he began writing an analysis on the other quirks he saw at play. Izuku knew he shouldn't have spent so much time on one examination site, but he couldn't help it. It started when Katsuki saved the first boy, and then he used an extraordinary quirk to calm him down. Izuku didn't know all of the implications, but it seemed to be response-oriented. Katsuki's quick thinking about the guidelines of the exam definitely saved him from being put into the general education course. The other boy, Shinso, was just as clever. He needed a little push from Katsuki, but he picked just the right quirk to help with Uraraka's situation when the zero-pointer was released. Its fall was just another example of Kaken's raw power and why he'd be great as a hero. He doesn't think he'll forget what he's done, but Katsuki has grown. Izuku finished up his thoughts in his notebook before he decided to take a break. He managed to get notes on all of the examinees' quirks, mostly just baseline analysis unless something interested him, like Shinso's quirk. It was so cool. He already took to screen recording it so he could watch it whenever he wanted. First, Izuku needed to log out. Getting out of the UA network would be a lot easier than going in, now that he already knows all of its weak points. It was funny how they were set up. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed as he clicked away at his keyboard, weaving backwards through the code. He knew that he only just started this whole hacking process a year ago. UA's security system was built by one of the world's smartest rats. Izuku retreated out of the system as quickly as possible. He knew if pro-hero Nedu checked the security measures after the exam, he'd know Izuku was here. There was one thing still bothering Izuku: there were these switch codes. After Izuku passed a firewall, the switch code turned on. But when he went back through, it stayed on. Izuku needed to weave back through the code, log back into the network, and turn every switch code off as he logged out before Nedu logged back in. Izuku hoped the speed of his retreat didn't make the code sloppy, but he was so screwed. Izuku took a breath as his fingers practically slammed on the keys to log back into the network. Izuku barely stopped to breathe when he made it back to the camera screen. He saw the students retreating from the exam on his screen that was split into the different exam sites. The Vigilante didn't leave time to gawk as he began logging out. He only had a few minutes max before Nedu caught him. He did not need to know what happened after that. Izuku began patching up the switches ingrained in the code swiftly. He felt like he was backpedaling out of a trap. A maze that felt just hard enough to the point where he could get through. Almost like the security measures were made for me. Nedu walked into his office with a pop in his step that made everyone uneasy. Everyone around him attempted to calm their jitters by telling one another it was probably because a student had potential to be his personal student. But then when the written exams passed and the infamous principal still had that glint in his eye, the teachers continued to deny their worries by muttering that the student must be in the hero course. Even after, when all exams had passed and the students were leaving the building, the staff still had yet to identify what had the principal in such an uppity mood. Needless to say, an eerie air hung over the entire school as Nedu walked its halls that day. The mammal hopped into his chair and calmly opened his laptop. He believes he's given the criminal long enough. Nedu sifted through the maze of codes he created. He knew the Vigilante would be wise enough to use any weak spots, but the switch codes he used were all still in the clear. The stoat practically deflated seeing as his little trick didn't work. He's been trading information with the Vigilante anonymously for about a year. There was no doubt that the human was a moth to a flame when it came in front of a quirked society. Aizawa merely confirmed his suspicions. Now, the thing that irked Principal Nedu wasn't how he was a kid, that much was obvious enough with how he talked online with false professionalism. It was how the principal couldn't figure out who the kid was. He searched vast databases for any kind of intelligence quirk, and then expanded towards all quirks, missing children, children in group homes. Nothing came up. And now Nedu found himself practically deflated against his desk. The Vigilante didn't come. He was hoping to at least ask some questions about his outstanding analytical skills. Nedu still had one more thing to check. Nedu logged back into the code, not wasting any time to see if the trap was truly sprung. Nedu broke into a maniac grin after seeing the final line of code uploaded. A virus. The Vigilante got his prize. And quite possibly a virus. Now, in order for the Vigilante to have done such a thing without Nedu noticing, he would have had to broken in and followed the maze of weak points in the firewalls Nedu laid out. In just a few minutes, considering the Vigilante would have known when Nedu would be watching the exam, and then essentially backpedal through the security system and recode all of the switched-on commands within the code, which also meant he would have had to memorize the original code as he was hacking it. Now that Nedu looked at it, there were slight variants within the code, clearly caused by the short time the Vigilante had, though Nedu doubted anyone else would have noticed in a different situation. For any teacher at UA, they've all been well acquainted with a certain stoat, and know to never get on his bad side, so when any of the staff were passing through the same hall that the principal's office resided, they would feel prickled throughout their body and the temperature dropped to a certain degree. Anyone else who was oblivious to these changes, or was unfamiliar with the unspoken rules of UA and entered this sacred space anyway would have heard an eerie chuckle echoing through the doors of said principal's office. Then laughter. Then cackles that sounded borderline made by a villain. Toshinori froze entirely. He supposed this is what happened when he didn't trust his gut. He felt afraid to move a hair until the maniacal laughter ceased erupting. Only after the halls went back to their original temperature did he deem it safe to silently tiptoe past the office. At least it wasn't him. Izuku has made a decision. Burn it. What? Burn it? I don't want to see that an inch of it survived. But, don't you love this thing? Scratch that. Aren't you too broke but to buy a new one, kid? May or may not have a hacked into you. Izuku fidgeted with his fingers as he looked down at the ground. He'd met Dabi about a month ago and just barely managed to stop him from continuing his homicides by bonding over tragic backstories and daddy issues. Now they occasionally trade information, train, go on missions for cash, and eat the occasional meal together. It really wasn't that much, they just needed to share a starter because two broke people don't make a good team. And? Weren't you meaning to try at some point? The scared-faced man questioned. Yes, but he seems to have caught on. What do you mean? Is he causing problems? What's the a-hole doing to make you want to burn your shitty laptop? Dabi exclaimed as he flipped the device in different directions, trying to identify why the kid didn't want it. The principal Nedu. Dabi raised an eyebrow. You mean that rat? What? Did he outsmart your computer or something? Did he do something to it? The man asked, poking at any USB plugs. I don't exactly know. Izuku scratched the back of his head awkwardly. The F, you mean you don't know? Aren't you supposed to be some computer genius or something? Dabi asked, exasperated. I only learned how to hack a year ago. Izuku protested. The scarred man huffed. Not exactly helping your case, kid. Dabi had no doubt whoever this kid was is a genius. The little gremlin memorizes the patrol routes of heroes and the layout of buildings, and all escape and entrance routes, vents included. He has a plan A, B, C, and D. And those are the plans Dabi knows of. Usually while doing borderline illegal jobs, they've never needed to go any further down the alphabet. I haven't opened it yet. Izuku admitted quietly. So why not C? Dabi popped open the laptop without warning, allowing it to turn on. Then wait, fish. Izuku jumped towards Dabi, who smirked and held the laptop over his head. Todoroki would have been Izuku's age by now, huh? Dabi laughed a moment at Izuku's pathetic attempts at grabbing the laptop. Welcome back, Vigilante. Izuku yelped as he heard the automated voice of a certain principal of UA. He quickly tugged the back of Dabi's jacket, causing him to momentarily duck away from view of the laptop's camera. Don't let it see your face. Izuku cowered behind the coated man, who looked unamused while staring directly at the camera. Downloading assets. Dabi smirked as the boy beside him was almost in tears as he watched his electronic device perish in live feed. Izuku scrambled to grab duct tape out of his book bag because anything can be fixed with duct tape, so he could rip a piece off and cover the camera. Burn it before he starts tracking you's dash. Izuku exclaimed with a crack in his voice. His face flushed for a moment as the computer seemed complete with its ministrations. Dabi made no move to do so. This was amusing. Maybe if this kid caught the attention of a principal, he could hopefully get a proper education and not those shitty online classes that he also needed his shitty laptop for. Wait. Midoriya scrambled through his tool belts before pulling out a hard drive and shoved it into the computer a little too aggressively. Come on. The boy began muttering out of stress, a string of word vomit of what Dabi could only assume was a narration of what he was doing. He dragged a video file over to the uploading tab and backed away as it loaded. It's a race at this point. Izuku informed Dabi. What is it? The man asked Izuku, who was fidgeting nervously as the two programs were uneasily close. It's a video of the UA entrance exams. I was originally gonna get it off my computer for safety reasons, but now I need to get it off so Nedu doesn't erase it. Dabi perked up. Do you have the recommendation examinees as well? The scarred man asked. Now is not the time to be dealing information. Izuku was too stressed to notice the cracks in his voice. His hand went up to allow his pointer finger to cover the bottom half of his mouth as he muttered towards the moribund computer as though encouraging it to load faster than the infection on the files. Yes. Izuku exclaimed as he hurriedly pulled out the flash drive and slammed the computer shut. Can I burn it now? Hello, Vigilante. Am I a dog, am I a mouse, or am I a bear? More importantly, I'm the principal of UA. Where'd you go? I believe I have quite the tempting offer. Izuku slammed his hands over his mouth and frantically shook Dabi, mouthing whispered exclaims of panic. The smaller boy stopped as Dabi approached the computer. However, just as the flames touched the cover, he scooped it up and opened the screen. There you are. Izuku scrambled to get to the back of the laptop without being in the camera's view. He glared at the man holding his laptop and not burning it. Me. Dabi did a cheeky grin towards Izuku, who was dragging his finger across his throat in angry jerking motions. Wonderful. As I can see, you are much older than I initially expected you to be. I was going to make an offer for you to be my personal student. But you clearly are occupied with other things, so perhaps you would be interested in a different offer. Dabi raised an eyebrow above the computer towards the shocked green-haired boy. Say, is there someone else with you? Nedu asked, sipping his tea with a knowing smirk. Dabi looked over at Izuku, who returned to performing the motion across his throat with greater urgency. Yeah. Izuku gasped in betrayal before scrambling up to close the computer and run with it. And could you blame him? The kid's a genius. He has to get his education somehow. Dabi will help him out eventually. The man was too tired to chase the eccentricity of the determined kid as he raced towards the docks. Dabi watched from a distance, walking lazily behind the Vigilante as he ran towards the docks. As he ran towards the water, the kid dropped the laptop and kicked. He just punted his laptop. The device didn't get far, lacking in aerodynamics. It landed on his red shoe at an awkward angle before it sunk into the shallow waters. It's dead now. Dude. Come on, kid, you kinda have to admit it was a pretty good offer, Dabi said temptingly. He leaned over the dock, glancing into the water. Fish began gathering curiously around the laptop, nibbling at the newcomer. Dabs. Everything is going to sheet right now. This is not a friend for me. It's a trap. Izuku turned sharply and began speed walking away from the dock. Dabi groaned at the fact he had to continue to use the muscles God had given him. He'd prefer to be a blob of skin and bones at this point. He followed the boy away from the docks as he paced. What do you mean? Dabi asked with a raised eyebrow. Izuku sighed as his legs sprung up, allowing him to hop onto the few-foot-tall brick wall, clearly built for aesthetics. He swung around the street light before hopping back next to Dabi with his arms crossed. Well, Tsukiji, who I thought was my friend, put Eraserhead on my case. He's like one of the coolest, most skilled underground heroes ever. Not to mention he fights quirkless most of the time because his quirk doesn't work with mutants and he's incredibly skilled with his capture weapon. Dabi, sensing the oncoming rant, attempted to cut the child off. Kid dash. He must have been practicing with it for so long to be able to move like that. I can't help but notice how he incorporates a variety of fighting techniques into his style. He doesn't so much make his movement big but quick and effective and dash. Kid. Oh sorry, it was always one step forward and two steps back with the greenette. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Tell me about it later. But look, kid, what do you mean the detective sent Eraserhead after you? Izuku huffed and ran a hand over his face. They sent Eraserhead after me. Hawks also knows now, which is fantastic. Now my computer is busted and dash. What? My computer's busted, now I'm probably gonna have to do something super risky to dash. No. Before that. Hawks knows I exist? Dabi ran a hand through his hair. How the hell did you manage to get the number 3 hero in Japan up your butt? He really wanted to shake Izuku by the shoulders so hard that the rest of his brain cells died out so maybe he could grow some new ones. Well, Eraserhead contacted him because of our online debates, I suppose. Izuku shrugged as if it wasn't a big deal. It's not a big deal really dash, his voice broke. Dabi, what do I do? I don't know, kid. The scared fire user put a hand atop Izuku's head in an attempt at comfort. The boy brushed him off and walked away. I'm going on patrol. Let's hit up Tsuyama's coffee later, alright? Yeah, sure. I'm good. I'm okay. 4 points. Shinso was 4 points away from becoming a hero. He barely even got into the Gen Ed course. What was wrong with him? With his quirk? He shouldn't be doing this. What point does it make anyway? He's going to end up here at some point, so why not start early? He's only in the general education course. They must have found someone with a flashier quirk. What a joke. Shinso dreaded seeing Katsuki again after that. Right now, the boy walked the streets in the early morning of the red light district with a surgical mask and a black hoodie. This is where crime happens, right? What was he doing? He could always just get an after-school job. Though, isn't this just gonna happen anyways? He doesn't have a heroic quirk. Everyone just wants to use his quirk for something. At least he's the one using it this time around. His eyes scanned the area, looking for a civilian victim. He knew he could pick just about anyone with a quirk like his, though instinctively he searched the crowds for any weak and scrawny-looking people. Though a voice in the back of his mind screamed, "Aren't they just like you? Aren't these the people we've been wanting to protect? He very subtly bumps into the smaller boy. Oh sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going and a dash. The boy stammers and spins his finger together. Hitoshi cringed in spite of himself. Are you alright? Yeah. Hitoshi hesitated for a moment before pulling back on the string that tugged at his brain. He awkwardly weaved through the crowd and led the now brainwashed kid into an alley. Give me your wallet. Hitoshi stammered. He told himself this was for practice, but every fiber in his body was screaming wrong. The green-haired boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet that was tearing at the edges. Shinso grimaced and his hands peeked inside. There he found a 2-year-old coupon for McDonald's, Endeavor's business card and 42 cents. What the F dash dot? Hitoshi clambered backwards and released the control on this victim. Sorry, I don't have much. I just went shopping earlier, so I'm kinda out. The green-haired kid didn't miss a beat. Most people were disoriented after being released from the control of his quirk. This wasn't the only red flag either. The boy's eyes flashed with recognition. Are you okay? Hitoshi's eyes darted back down towards the useless wallet in his hands before he handed it back. Most kids their age had at least a few bucks on them in case of emergencies, even without full-fledged jobs. What? His so-called victim asked as he took his wallet back and plopped it back into his pocket. Are you good? You don't have anything in here? And I thought I was broke. Hitoshi grumbled to the side and shoved his hands in his pockets. Oh, I'm fine. But are there any applications of your quirk I should be worried about? The broccoli boy tossed his bag off his back and took out a notebook and clicked a pen. What? Now it was Hitoshi's turn to be confused. Oh, right, I'm kind of a geek when it comes to quirks. The boy shrugged. He was an enigma. Hell, Hitoshi just tried to rob him, and this other boy apologized that he didn't have money. Hitoshi ran a hand over his face over the absolute insanity of the situation. Did this kid already have a page on his quirk? Actually, there's something that has been bothering me. You're pretty darn new to this whole robbing people thing, aren't you? Izuku grinned with a raised eyebrow towards the other. Shinso scratched the back of his head sheepishly. He knew it was quite obvious, though having a conversation with the person he had just tried to rob was way more awkward than just getting arrested at this point. Nah, first time. Shinso attempted to be casual, but the large green eyes staring at him spoke way too many words with every glance. He felt like every atom of himself was being stared at. But then I suppose I should expect this to be your last then. Izuku said nonchalantly as he scribbled in his notebook. Why are you doing this anyway? It's only logical to assume you have a reason, right? I didn't get into UA. The words Shinso has been itching to say to anyone. Someone who would just glance at another lost story in a hero-built society. What? Hitoshi did a retake. He sounded surprised. What do you mean what? I didn't get in. Shinso repeated with more of a misunderstanding shrug. How? I calculated every possible factor. You should have gotten in. You had more than enough rescue points, unless they didn't count those, but that wouldn't have made sense because it's been nearly the exact same exam, not to mention how many people you saved. You should have been at 20-something in the exams, which would have been enough to dash. How do you know that? The boy seemed to stop his muttering and his entire train of thought. I was there? No, you weren't. The very average-looking kid let out a heavy sigh. Fine. I may or may no they've hacked into a scammer stoachexum. I really like quirks, you know? But to think the principak nuawaskiming and hekotmieverus nomil laptopasathi bottomo fatherkin to have an awaited o workini tobian woni and dash? Hideshit cut the other boy off when he needed to take a breath. Hold on to breath. As insane as it is that you managed to hack into you, why do you think I got in? I was 4 points off. Izuku's eyes furrowed. If that's the case then, no, you definitely should have been awarded enough points. I'm sorry, Shinso. You will become an amazing hero. The greenette affirmed. What? You're getting into that hero course? I just need to buy a new laptop. The other boy bit his nails, seemingly in thought. You can have my old one. Shinso offered. He felt bad for almost robbing the eccentric but average-looking boy. Besides, it was better than throwing it out. Wait, really? The other's eyes lit up, almost glowing in the dark alleyway. I guess so. Hitoshi shrugged and scratched the back of his head. The other boy was buzzing. Thank you, Hitoshi. I promise you won't regret this. It's still weird that you know my name without telling you, by the way. Shinso deadpanned. Alright. Well, my name is Izuku. Midoriya Izuku. Feel free to just use my given name. You want my number or something? Shinso asked. How would Izuku get his laptop without knowing a meetup spot? Oh, don't worry, I would have found you anyway. Shinso's eyes narrowed uncomfortably, but made the better decision not to comment on it. Here. Hitoshi pulled out his phone and watched the Izuku pulled out his. Oh god. What is that? What FNG century did this time traveler pull that device from? Hitoshi opened his mouth before he could think too much about it. You can have my old phone too. Aizawa Shoyuda was in his classroom, looking through the videos of the UA entrance exam when he was called down to the principal's office. He didn't know why he was called down. He was hoping that he was going to finally accept his 2-week notice and not look him dead in the eyes as he shoved the paper into the shredder before offering him some tea. Even if that wasn't the case, Aizawa still had to talk to him about an issue with the scoring. The teacher is all too aware of the bias towards flashy quirks. He had to live through it himself. So imagine Shuda's surprise when he found a teenager with an overpowered quirk, but no way to use it in the exam, managed to rack up 60 or so points by rescue. The hero wishes he had thought of that in his youth, but he was even more sad that somehow, the kid didn't get in, he had enough points. So as to how Shoyuda hasn't stormed into Nedzu's office and scolded him silly was beyond himself. He had at least a few papers filled with possible calculations and variables Shoyuda had missed, though even when giving the failing score the benefit of the doubt, Shinso Hitoshi still wound up with 44 points, barely passing, but enough to get in. The Erasure hero planned to use this chance wisely and explain exactly why he should just be fired already. Or why the purple-haired kid should be placed in his class. Depending on whatever reason the rat calls him down for. And to Aizawa's utter despair, he just knew it wasn't going to end with him losing his day job, but a man can hope. Aizawa walked through the principal's doors, watching them open automatically for himself. He walked straight to the principal's desk and sat in the chair in front of it. In the slightly higher chair across sat Nedu. He only sat a few inches above eye level with most humans. The underground hero recognized it as a power move. I believe you already know why I've called you here? Nedu folded one paw over the other atop his desk. Shuda's eyes widened. Wait, you mean I can actually leave? Shoyuda almost let a smile break through his stone-like visage. His eyes darted around the office, taking everything in. It felt odd being in here for the very last time. His eyes glanced at the pictures of past graduated classes from every course while under Nezu's guidance. The couch Nedu used to allow him to sit and have tea with him when they needed to chat. The tile floors that have been used all throughout UA didn't vary here either, and the... Oh, no. Nedu broke into a fit of laughter. See, I knew I liked you for a reason. Of course not. Though I'm quite sure you're wondering why I haven't shredded your last 2-week notice. Well, it seems we've hit a milestone. Nedu proudly pulled out a frame with Shuda's last 2-week notice inside. A plaque was attached to the bottom, ingrained with a fancy gold metal plate that read, Aizawa Shuda's 100th 2-week notice, towards the bottom of the frame. Nedu seemingly took a moment to revel in the way Aizawa's eye twitched before hopping off of his chair and hanging the last whisper of Aizawa's hopes and dreams on his wall, like a mountain man would a decapitated mammal. Now that that's cleared up, you've been wanting to discuss the child named Hitoshi Shinso, correct? Aizawa, who was just recovering from Nezu's blow, only nodded, his face remaining stoic, but his heart discouraged. Splendid! Exactly as I've been hoping for. Now, I'd like you to record his acceptance letter, explaining that there was an error in our point evaluation. Aizawa would have groaned, realizing that he'd have to record another video of all things, but knowing that this boy was probably distraught, despite knowing he should have gotten in, stopped him. Do you want me to send it in? No, I have other plans. Aizawa did not want to know what these other plans were, so he begrudgingly stood up and walked out of the office before Nedu could dip further into detail. Now that Aizawa had that sorted out, he could focus on his other pain in the side, the Vigilante. Ever since he's been assigned to the little creep, he's never been close enough to talk. The underground hero has been patrolling the Vigilante's territory, in the red light district, and has yet to get any closer to him than he has on that first night. See, the Vigilante is solving more problems than he's causing, so no one has that original urgency to capture him. This includes the underground hero. Aizawa doesn't doubt that the kid is skilled in what he does, but what worries Aizawa is that he's just that, a kid. The hero has no idea what brought the kid to becoming a vigilante, but that amount of skill doesn't come from playing hero. These skills weren't built intentionally. The way he fights, moves, and observes isn't a habit learned. These are built habits. They are his survival. Shoyuta didn't know what this kid went through, but he knows he needs to reach the kid. Somehow, someday, somewhere. He will give this kid a new way of living, and may Kami hope that Shoyuta finds a way of forgiving whoever hurt this med kid. Izuku was in terrible need of a haircut. He could feel the brush of its split ends against his neck and spilling over his shoulders. After Hitoshi's number was forced upon him, he and the other boy agreed to meet at Dagoba Beach. Izuku faintly remembered his mom taking him there back before the beach became a dump. Though it could have been a different one. His memories could only go so far back before they got ever so fuzzy. He's already forgotten his father's face. The only thing that prevented his mother's face from slipping from his mind was the occasional dream. And even then he felt the shape of her eyes slipping away. Sometimes he wonders if her eyes were really green, or if he knows they were just because he sees them every time he looks in his reflection. It's not like he deserves to mourn. Izuku's red shoes clashed against the sand and sank about halfway into the beach as he walked down the stone steps connecting the forgotten beach to the rest of the world. There was that particular boy in the distance. The brightness of the sun behind him made it difficult to tell that it was Shinso, though the bits of purple at the edges were more than enough to leave Izuku bounding towards him. "Hey Shinso!" Izuku waved as he approached the boy. Shinso, who was hauling some of the discarded metal across the beach, dropped what he was hauling and waved him over. "What are you doing here?" Izuku's foot lightly jabbed at the dropped garbage and gave Shinso a curious glance. "Oh, well, since I didn't get into UA's hero course this time, the only thing left is to try harder, right? I'll try even harder during the sports festival." Hitoshi grinned and made a determined fist towards Izuku. Izuku forced a determined smile back, but all Izuku could see was a mountain of guilt. He was the reason Shinso didn't get in. Izuku didn't just know it. He was sure of it. After Izuku had met up with the boy, he firmly scrambled through his notes on the other students. The lowest score to get into UA was Hagakure, who scored a 41. Her quirk was invisibility. With the amount of rescue points Hitoshi should have accumulated, he would have ended up with a 63 or so. The only possible explanation was that Nedu knew. Of course he did. Izuku didn't quite understand why Nedu would let go of a quirk like Shinso's with so much potential, but for whatever reason, Izuku was sure it had to do with him. Nedu must have recognized Izuku watching the Kaken and Shinso duo the most during the exams. Kaken's score was way too noticeably high to fumble to that extent. Everyone would recognize that the kid who destroyed countless robots didn't get in, and that would raise suspicions. Kaken may have seemed less extreme this time around, but that doesn't mean he wasn't still confident in his abilities and counting his point along the way. There's no doubt he would have known something was up. And then there was Shinso, the kid who clearly didn't have any flashy quirk. The kid who didn't take out a single robot. There was no way he could have gotten in compared to what the other students could do. It was just so easy to look past all the good he could do on the battlefield, that no one would even think if he didn't get in. Especially since the students weren't informed about the rescue points prior to the exam. It would be so easy to say he didn't make it in. It would be so easy to send a message. Now, Izuku didn't know how Nedu would know how much Izuku cared, but he thinks that's what scared him the most. Izuku knows such a quirk would be wasted if Shinso doesn't get in. He's obviously going to do something about it. If the rat could figure all this out about Izuku just from their short emails about his quirk analysis, the boy didn't know what to do. Other than to help Shinso. "Yeah, I guess you're right. But don't worry Shinso, I'll make sure you get in. I promise." The purple-haired boy raised an unbelieving eyebrow. That's a pretty hefty promise for a guy that just stood and stared off into space for. Shinso checked the non-existent watch on his wrist, for minutes. Shinso shook his head. You don't have to lie. I don't know how advanced your hacking skills are, but if you just want my old laptop for the sake of having one, I don't mind. Really? It was just gonna get thrown out anyway. Shinso shrugged, walking over to his bag that was back over by the stone steps. Izuku followed like a puppy would its owner who was clearly having a bad day. No. I mean it. I'll find a way. Because I know you got in. Izuku confirmed. Shinso shot him another look of suspicion. I also recorded the exam. Izuku huffed. I don't have the flash drive with me, but maybe we can meet up sometime and we can look over it. I have a copy of the grading rubric. You racked up more than enough rescue points to get in. Izuku grabbed Shinso's shoulders and made sure he looked him directly in the eyes. Shinso thought for a moment. If you have a video, does that mean you can see the other students? I know when I saved some of them, they were pretty beat up, the supposed-to-be UA student commented thoughtfully. Izuku couldn't help the grin that peeked up from his lips. He just knew that Hitoshi would be an amazing hero. Yeah, they were fine. They got healed up pretty quickly with the help of Recovery Girl's quirk. Did you know her quirk is instantaneous? She doesn't even kiss the wound. I'm pretty sure most healer quirk have some sort of mutation portion to it, especially when they hover directly over the wound, because that would indicate the cells are getting stimulated by a physical force and not an emitter one dash. Okay, wait up, genius. How do you know that? Do you have some sort of analysis quirk or something? You'd be a pretty witty hero with that kind of a quirk. Probably could go underground. That's what I was going to do. Izuku had a look of surprise on his face that instantly turned into a scold at Hitoshi's last sentence. It was odd, living with someone who was so over the moon about himself for so long, and then meeting someone like Hitoshi. What you will do? Izuku immediately corrected. Hitoshi scoffed with a smirk and an eye roll as he pushed Izuku's hands off of his shoulders and swung his backpack over one shoulder and facing his front so he could shuffle through it. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The boy sighed, handing the laptop to Izuku, and then his old phone. Izuku shook his head and waved his hands around out of nervousness. Oh, sorry Shinso, I really can't accept. I honestly thought that you were joking about that earlier. Izuku attempted to push the phone back, however Hitoshi was persistent. If you don't accept this right now, I'm going to try and give it to you every time we meet until you either take it home or take it willingly. Might as well keep it now. Again, I know it's not in the best shape, but you need a new phone and this one would have gotten thrown out anyway. Shinso shoved the phone back into Izuku's hands with the determination of all might. Ari, I can't just dash. Oh no. Looks like I'm deleting your old number. Too late. Shinso made a dramatic sigh. I guess I can never text you again. Izuku scrambled to take the phone. All right. I'll take it, geez dash. Izuku huffed as he snatched the phone. I took it to get all the information off of it so you should be able to set your own password, same thing with the laptop. Shinso mentioned to Izuku as he turned on the phone. I don't know what to say. Thank you Shinso. It was odd not swiping his fingers across an absolutely demolished phone screen for once. Don't mention it. Shinso shrugged. We should hang out more. Maybe we can watch the exams after you get accepted. Izuku grinned. I understand that you can hack and stuff, but how is that gonna help me get into the hero course? You said it yourself. The principal caught you. You can't just hack my name in. Shinso huffed solemnly. Well, I don't plan to. I know you got in. I'm just making a deal with the devil, I suppose. Izuku sighed. Did you know that you had over 60 rescue points? I think that's pretty amazing that you managed to get in with just that alone. Izuku said encouragingly, despite Shinso's increasingly skeptical stare. Whatever. Just don't be crushed if none of this works out, yeah? The lanky boy tilted his head with an inapposite shrug. Izuku shook his head. I won't let you down, Shinso. He was the reason the boy didn't make it into the hero course after all. The least he could do was fix it. He needs to fix what he can. Tsukachi walked into his office and sat down. The clock ticked exactly once. It's the dash. Whoever walked into his office found themselves getting cut off. Damn it. The detective stormed out of his office, brushing past the poor officer who just wanted to let him know of the current situation in their hands. It was only hours after did Tsukachi remember that they were an intern on their first day. The officer stormed through the office. Anyone in his way scrambled to get by, feeling as though they just crossed paths with a black cat. Naomasa clambered on his tool belt as he brushed past his coworkers and practically threw himself in his cruiser. He floored the gas and unhooked the radio, putting it up to his mouth. Eraserhead. He's on dash. I know. It seems as though the underground hero was just as displeased. The detective floored it to the given location and soon saw a sight he'd never see. The vigilante was out in the open, holding a knife to a guy's neck. He stood at the top of a building as he announced how wonderful it would be to watch his insides spilled out. The building was already surrounded by multiple police officers, most of which were trying to keep the nightly onlookers from getting too close. They all knew how unpredictable the vigilante was. One wrong move and they could all be covered in glitter, or covered in someone else's blood. Naomasa rushed over to the underground hero who stood observant at the bottom of the building. The detective already had his pen and pencil out to jot down the information. Something isn't right, Eraserhead states lowly. No kidding. Tsukachi takes a moment to note the number of law enforcement on scene and jotting them down before he continues. That so-called kid is holding that man at knife point describing how he's gonna kill him. This is definitely not good. I hope someone's recording so we can later compile his exact words as court evidence when we catch this BSTRD. Before I didn't quite mind him, but this is actual criminal activity. Aizawa hums in response, though his eyes never leave the vigilante. He looks at them as if he half expects some villain to rip off the mask and exclaim that they were framing it on the vigilante the whole time. Naomasa could understand where Eraserhead was coming from. The vigilante looked short, about the height of a kid in Shura's class. However, there's no counting that everything about the criminal could be caused by additional quirk factors. This is the first time they've actively caught the vigilante out in the open. He had to admit that it was odd for the vigilante to be looking for publicity. He had always been stealthy and careful of the public eye. To see the vigilante doing something like this wasn't right. You see what I mean now? Eraserhead asked. He was glancing over to Tsukachi, who clearly had some sort of expression on his face that spoke too many words. The detective caved. It is a little weird. The detective admitted to the now annoyingly smug hero. He took another look at Eraserhead and noticed him watching with his eyebrows furrowed, deep in thought. So what's the deal? Tsukachi asked firmly. If I try and save the guy now, I might not be quick enough. It's best if we get someone to defuse the situation. Aizawa huffed, his eyes boring holes into the vigilante and his captive. That was until a second one came on scene. Eraserhead visibly stumbled back as the first vigilante was mauled over by the second. Get my face off of your body. By now, the people on scene could only see the man who was captured. He was staring behind himself in fear as the angle of the building prevented them from seeing what was going on. The voice was distorted with his usual gadget on his mask. Tsukachi thought he could hear just the edges of his true voice peeking out of the corner of his words, though it was probably his imagination. Shoyuta looks over at Tsukachi and nods before flinging himself up to the building, only 5 stories or so, and rescuing the civilian. Though, he did notice his gaze linger towards the sound of the scuffle. The erasure hero brought the shaken-up man to the ground before glancing towards the detective. There are 2 of them now. Naomasa felt like a middle-aged baseball coach whose little league just threw the game. He wanted to take his hat off, crumble it before throwing it to the ground. They're fighting each other. I'm surprised they haven't drawn blood yet. I'm going to watch from a distance and proceed accordingly. You should take care of the victim and probably ask what happened. I'm going to observe. I'll wait to step in until I figure out what in the world that kid's gotten into. Tsukachi doesn't even know how he was going to explain this in the case report. Shoyuta Aizawa was just about to go on his 15-minute break when he heard a commotion a few buildings down. He was at a higher elevation, carefully observing the situation for a moment before pulling out his work phone and dialing the station as he traveled down. From afar, it looked like a basic hostage situation, the faces shadowed under the moonlight. The underground hero took a moment to mourn 15 minutes of yellow sleeping bag naps and jelly pouches as he flew towards the ground, making a sour attempt to push back the civilians by himself. Luckily, a number of police shortly arrived, giving Shoyuta the chance to look up at the scene. It was difficult to see the faces in the light, or maybe it was because one of the figures, the shorter one, was wearing a mask. Or maybe it was the fact that it was the kid's mask that made it hard to see. Naomasa Tsukachi ran through the scene like a rampaging bull. One of his eyes was twitching as he looked up at the vigilante. Eraserhead knew something was wrong. As obnoxious as the kid has been at times, holding someone at knife point in front of a crowd simply wasn't his style. It didn't fit his overly pure motives. Aizawa was the type of guy to trust his gut, and his gut screamed at him that there was something extremely wrong. Naomasa had his teeth clenched in annoyance as he shortly conversed with Eraserhead. They could only exchange a few short words before another vigilante tackled the first one, leaving the man he had taken hostage frozen in place. The pair stood in shock for only a moment. Eraserhead shot his capture scarf up towards a large sign overhanging the building the crime scene was on. The hero quickly scooped up the civilian and swung around the billboard, just in time to see double. He didn't think he'd need a drink tonight, but now he might need it. The pair of vigilantes were wrestling, though the hero couldn't help but notice one was using significantly more knives than the other. Aizawa lowered himself and the civilian to the ground and set him down next to Tsukachi. Something was wrong, and the kid once again found himself in the middle of it. There are two of them now. Aizawa nodded at the officer's statement, who looked about two more of these types of instances away from quitting. The hero turned his back, wrapping a piece of his scarf around his hand, getting ready to throw it up towards the top of the building. They're fighting each other. I'm surprised they haven't drawn blood yet. I'm going to watch from a distance and proceed accordingly. You should take care of the victim, and probably ask what happened. I'm going to observe. I'll wait to step in until I figure out what in the world that kid's gotten into. Aizawa nodded once again before pelting off towards battle on the roof. The vigilante with the knives had the second vigilante pinned. I gave you some of my blood because you needed it, not to save some for later and use it to commit a crime. The second vigilante kicked the first vigilante over his head, causing him to flip off of the second. Vigilante number 2 scrambled away from the vigilante who favored knives. Oh, come on, Vigilante-kun. Isn't this fun? He got back on his feet, spinning the knife in his hand. Not when you probably just made me a public figure. Oh, this is really bad. Toga, I'm supposed to stay on the down low. The boy complained, waving his hands wildly. He suddenly lunged at the first vigilante and quickly dragged him off of the top of the building. Aizawa followed them off the building, his eyes locating them in the alley below. By now, the pro hero has an idea of what's going on. He doesn't know the reasons behind it, or any type of background information that would have been rather important by now, but he's quite sure one of the two has a transformation quirk. Most likely based on blood, from what the kid was saying. The second vigilante suddenly tugged the first over to the wall by his arm, out of Shuta's view. The man could only assume that he knew he was there. Or maybe something else was at play. Izuku grumbled about his vigilante persona being compromised, but he couldn't afford wasting time on that now. Izuku felt it. The prickle of hairs standing up on the back of his neck. He remembers this feeling. Back when he went to school, seconds before disaster. He could practically hear the whispers of what jeers they'd use, or how they'd try once again to break him down. Or even worse, others. Being who he is today, he doesn't think he could have been here without it. Someone was watching them. Izuku pulled Toga to the side of the alley, just in time to see himself melt from her now ND body. I must say, your freckles are so cute. Toga squealed, to which Izuku rolled his eyes as he took off his hoodie and handed it to her. I don't know where you put your clothes, but please wash and return it when you're done. Or not. It doesn't matter. Stay here and hide. Eraserhead is on my case, so you can probably go free after I'm out of view. Toga's eyes widened as she was handed the hoodie. She put it on and broke into a huge smile, practically jumping on Izuku. Thank you. I will keep it forever. Izuku did an awkward pat back as he stepped away from the hug. Underneath his hoodie, Izuku wore a shirt that said, pants. The only thing Izuku could do now was pray that Eraserhead didn't pick up on his sense of humor, or else he'd have to get a new wardrobe, and he was tight on money as it was. And maybe dye his hair. Screw it. Izuku took off his shirt and turned it inside out, shoving it back over its head. Toga tilted her head but didn't say anything about it. He'd met her very recently. Only last night, in fact. He found her about to kill an innocent civilian. He found it very odd and extremely sad that such a young girl was becoming a villain. Because Izuku knows best that villains aren't born. They're made. So what makes heroes any different? What makes him different? People can only take so much. Only so much hatred and bad memories can pool within their consciousness before it begins to run up their ankles. Then the darkness makes it above their knees. Soon, it becomes hard to move freely when it gets up to your waist. You start to feel trapped. It gets up to your chest, and only then does it feel like you're just going through the motions. Then you find all of these experiences wrapping around your neck, leaving you no choice, or a better one, or an easier way out. After it consumes you fully, you never realize you're falling until it's too late. So why hasn't Izuku fallen yet? He supposes he was stuck in this limbo for now. He liked it this way. He can't get rid of it. Never will he forget, nor will he forgive. And he never has to. Though floating in this subliminal space of a consciousness filled with so many bottled-up thoughts, memories, feelings, and indifference never felt right either. After he'd let the civilian run away, Toga ended up laughing hysterically in some sort of mental breakdown. So, Izuku asked what she needed and gave it to her. He began conducting an analysis on her quirk and is starting to wonder if there's more to it than what meets the eye. After Izuku gave her some of his blood, he took her out for ice cream. She kept trying to touch his hair, though was overall super nice after getting properly fed. Izuku could only imagine the abuse she'd gotten, all because of the side effects of her quirk. And yet she still had a smile brighter than the sun. Izuku would know. He will save her. Izuku nodded to Toga, flashing a smile that she could hopefully see with just his eyes as he ran off into the alleys. It'd be harder to lose Eraserhead when he had a bird's eye view of every path he went down. So Izuku clambered on top of a garbage bin and jumped to reach an escape ladder, to which he climbed up with his usual speed. Izuku took off across the buildings, jumping between alleys. It wasn't long before Izuku felt the familiar prickle of hairs on the back of his neck. The boy was no idiot. There was no way he could outrun one of the best underground heroes. Though the chances of Izuku outrunning the other was slimmer with his feet on the ground. Eraserhead's vision was limited to what was on his horizon. If Izuku could suddenly duck down, probably behind a building, below Eraserhead's field of view, Izuku might have just enough time to escape and blend in with the civilians. At times like these, Izuku is incredibly gracious for his incredibly normal heritage. Despite the hero knowing that Izuku was aware of the chase, he still traveled with impeccable silence. The Vigilante had no doubt that even a sound-related quirk might have difficulty picking him up. Izuku aspired to be that good one day. Izuku flinched as his legs reflexively pushed him to take a barrel roll to the side, disrupting his path. Izuku didn't need to turn around to see the capture scarf that was flung towards him. It seems he couldn't get a break either as the scarf flung at an awkward angle, almost as if it intentionally adjusted to his quick reflexes. Izuku barely had time to think as he once again jumped away. Off of the building, his body had decided. Izuku was lucky that the fall was only a couple of floors. He wasn't lucky when there happened to be a fire escape ladder that nicked his left thumb on the way down and more than likely dislocated it, based on the sickening pop that echoed throughout the alley he not so smoothly landed in. Izuku immediately got to his feet and attempted to slither out of the predicament he's been caught in, though he didn't have much time for slithering as he felt the rough tug of Eraserhead's scarf from around his waist. The boy found himself rocketing upwards towards the hero standing on the edge of the building. Izuku felt like a salmon being reeled in by a fisherman as he hung aimlessly over the alley. Going fishing? Izuku felt his voice crack nervously as his eyes met the glowing red ones of the hero's. He did not find his joke amusing as instead of the edges of his mouth, the bottom lid of his eye was the one twitching. Now that Izuku was facing the hero, he had time to properly observe the hero so that he could take notes later, if he survived. Problem child, the underground hero huffed out, letting Izuku touch the ground with his toes, though the capture weapon was so taut that it barely left Izuku any wiggle room to touch his heels to the ground. Oh yeah, and his thumb kinda hurt. What a catch, Mr. Eraserhead sir. Though you kinda gotta let me go. I'm an endangered species. No fishing around these parts. You know you can't actually bring in a guy like me. There are still plenty of fish in the sea. Because it was true. Technically he can't bring in a quirkless kid for illegal use of a quirk. Izuku grinned sheepishly from behind his mask, thankful the voice modification he ingrained existed, as he would have died from embarrassment if his voice cracked this many times while talking to the guy and he heard it. He didn't know if the hero actually got his fishing puns, considering he probably didn't even take into account how undignified being reeled in like a fresh salmon was to Izuku, but the boy assumed the reaction would have been the same regardless. You're hurt. The erasure hero practically spat at the boy, finally taking a moment to blink. He still had his capture weapon wrapped snugly around the boy, though loosened it just enough so that he could pull Izuku's right arm out of it. The boy bit back the urge to hiss as the hero pulled Izuku closer to him so he could get a better look at his hand. For a variety of reasons, in fact, Eraserhead was a hero. A really cool hero who was assigned to capture him. Cool but lethal, and Izuku didn't like those chances. Now, Izuku has never had his thumb dislocated, surprisingly, but he knows it's gonna hurt just as well to get it back in after they, hopefully not, bring him back to the station. He knows how to relocate one, and has done so for only one other person by now. It still hurts. Maybe if he keeps dislocating it, he can learn how to dislodge it on command and escape HNDCFFS or something. But again, ow. And he already knew how to escape HNDCFFS anyway. A dislocated thumb was still extremely useful. It's fine. It's not that bad. I can pop it back in later. Izuku looked numbly at his thumb. He wiggled his hand around a bit, snickering and mumbling under his breath over how oddly it moved. Izuku found his mouth clamping shut after seeing Eraserhead's continued glare. No, Eraserhead, guess what? Continued glaring. The captured boy huffed. Oh, yeah, I almost forgot, I wanted to talk to you about something. Izuku's voice dropped the light-hearted tone he used to joke with the heroes who have tried to capture him. Eraserhead finally paused his piercing stare for his face to soften to one for reluctant questioning. We can talk after we get you to the station? I still want to take a better look at your hand. It doesn't look off, but Izuku didn't have time. He would cry over cutting off one of the best underground heroes to touch the face of the earth later. He couldn't afford to lose this for no reason. No. There's this new villain group. I know school hasn't started yet, but they're planning something. I'd give it a week before something goes wrong. Eraserhead dropped Izuku's hand, gently so as to not hurt him, directing his attention to the speaking boy. They don't like All Might. You know he's teaching there, right? Izuku asked the now flabbergasted teacher. Not much could surprise this man. He didn't even look surprised. Though Izuku could tell in the twitch of his brow that he'd managed to stump the underground hero. How did you know that? Eraserhead snapped. Izuku didn't have time to answer unimportant questions like that anyway, so he brushed it off. It's fine, the information gets released to the public within 2 days. Anyway, they've been collecting villains from the underground. They're paying them a sum of money to attack. I don't know why, but I'm worried that they have a means of attacking. I'm still trying to figure that out. I probably have to trade a bit more before Now it was Izuku's turn to be cut off. The boy was oddly grateful as he got the information he needed to get out, and the fact that he probably would have exploded into a mass of mumbles, possibly revealing a bit too much about his vigilante whereabouts. You've been trading in the underworld for information. Eraserhead was pinching the bridge of his nose. I only ever do that if lives are in imminent danger. What happens if you PSS off the wrong people? You can be targeted by gangs if you're not careful. The hero looked like he was getting done with the conversation. He was going to start moving soon. That's the last thing Izuku wants. It was time to wrap this up. Hey, Eraserhead? Yeah, kid? You grabbed the wrong thumb. Izuku's dislodged thumb allowed for odd and awkward movements that the capture scarf wasn't able to track down and immobilized within its capture. Izuku shifted just enough so his hand could grab the hilt of the knife Toga had so kindly given him with his other 4 fingers. His hand slipped behind his back. It was clever as the sudden movement of his arm gave Izuku just enough slack to cut the capture scarf. His arm bent at an awkward angle so that he could cut the scarf from behind his back, sliding the knife quickly upwards. This trick also assisted in Eraserhead not realizing what he was doing until he dropped the smoke bombs on the roof and made a break for it. See? Dislocated thumbs were impeccably useful. Aizawa Shoyuta practically threw himself into Tsukachi's office. The officer was already itching to see how the supposed kid managed to escape one of the best heroes that roamed the underground, contrary to said hero's belief. The hero began pacing Naomesa's office and running his hands through his hair. His eye was twitching as he stopped in front of the detective's desk. He dislocated his thumb. The detective was unfazed at this point, thumping his head on the desk into his hands. "I'm such an idiot. I grabbed the wrong hand." Tsukachi shook his head and went around the desk to put a hand on Shuta's shoulder to hopefully stop him from spiraling into gruff complaints. He's a smart kid. So he knows how to dislocate his thumbs? Tsukachi concluded. That was important to write in the case report, especially if they planned on cuffing him when they caught the Vigilante, which then brought up the whole questioning of mortality when it came to cuffing the Vigilante. Now, it wasn't that Naomesa didn't believe Shoyuta. His quirk told him that much. He trusts the teacher's instincts to be able to identify when someone is in need. However, like the detective previously stated, the criminal was smart. It could even be his quirk so that Shoyuta would go unintentionally easy on him when it came to capture. No, the detective was yanked out of his thoughts and blinked in confusion. What? The little sheet fell off a building, dislocated his thumb, so when I grabbed the wrong one, he used his just dislodged thumb to cut himself out. Shoyuta deadpanned, sauntering tiredly over to the coffee machine in the corner. Normally Naomesa would stop him, but even God could tell that the hero needed it. That probably had to have hurt. Are you sure he wasn't just tricking you? The detective didn't want to believe it. If the Vigilante could dislodge his thumbs at will, great. He was hopefully just a shorter man in his 50s with extensive training. Tsukachi. I heard the pop. He said he could probably pop it back in later. He then went on this rant of mutters, which I'm pretty sure he didn't even realize he was doing, about how he's only ever popped other people's thumbs back into their sockets. That was a problem in Tsukachi's firm wall of denial. The detective had firmly built it so that he wouldn't see the child on the other side. Who are the other people? I don't know. Maybe he's affiliated with a gang of some sort. No, he said they were civilians. Again, he mutters a lot and doesn't realize it. I don't bother stopping him because it's decent info. Aizawa's description of the Vigilante was tearing down his wall of denial brick by brick. Naomesa didn't want to believe it. Not that he couldn't, because the worst part about this was that he could. In a world built around heroics, the detective can imagine a kid lost to society's judgment. He can imagine this lost and forgotten kid who has potential to do good in the world. All it would have taken was one accident for a kid with an unwanted quirk's life to fall apart. So the kid could slip through the cracks of it. Tsukachi knows. Tsukachi can believe it. He just doesn't want to, the detective found. As though reading his thoughts, Eraserhead spoke up. We chose this line of work to help people. It doesn't matter if we want to or not, but you know as well as I do how delicate this situation is. He has potential. But he doesn't have the help he needs to push himself forward, and I think it's our job to make sure he believes it. Please, Tsukachi. We aren't going to get anywhere if we keep trying to capture him. Things need to change. I'm going to try and get in contact with Hawks again. Aizawa began walking towards the door. I'll change his file. Naomesa found himself speaking up. He is no longer capture on site. Tsukachi took a breath. He hoped that Eraserhead was right about what he just said. Thank you, detective. Shoyuta shot one of his rare smiles towards the man before walking out the door. Naomesa sat in his office for a bit contemplating, before standing up to stretch. He needed coffee. Tsukachi walked over to his coffee pot. God damn it, Aizawa. Looks like he needed to go to the staff room. Nedu was in his office. doing his usual afternoon chores before classes officially started up once again. He looked away from his laptop for a moment to close his eyes and sip his tea. It really helped to fully elongate the flavor. In the middle of his sipping, his ear twitched towards his computer. It seems as though he'd received a notification. Lots of notifications. Only students were told to message this account about any concerns they had. It seems Nezu's tea drinking was cut short as his mailbox was suddenly flooded. There were at least 40 emails, all of which from valid student emails. Whatever could have been the cause of this? From Ochako Uraraka. Hello Mr. Nezu. How are you? I'm super excited for school to start. Though, I was wondering how a boy named Shinso Hitoshi didn't get in. I was just contacted by someone, I'm assuming is a student, who told me that there were rescue points. I watched Shinso run around for the entire exam, saving other students. I have no doubt in my mind that he should have gotten in. He saved me and a lot of other future students. If it's true, and he really was only 4 points off, then I was wondering if I could give him some of mine? Thank you so much for your understanding. From Kaminari Denki. Hey Principal Man. I know I'm probably not on your watch list right now considering I barely passed both exams with all my brain cells intact. But I was wondering how Shinso was doing? I heard from someone that he didn't get in, which is a total bummer because he and his really cranky friend saved my when I overused my quirk. From Bakugu Katsuki. I was the kid who had the highest score on the exams. I know that there were rescue points. The dumb vigilante guy said so. I don't know how they were scored, but Hideshit scored enough to get in. If he didn't, then take some of mine. I have a lot. I'll still be number 1 without them. He has a pretty badass quirk. Get him in. So that explained it then. Nezu could keep scrolling, though he already knows what the majority of the emails were about. He couldn't help the manic grin that got painted across his face. As annoying as it was that the vigilante thought his way out of his trap, Nezu couldn't help but be giddy. He originally hoped to rehack the vigilante's computer and finally have a chat with him, but it seems like the vigilante had other ideas in mind. The emails were all from kids Shinso had helped during the exam, all of them offering to give points and vouch for him to get into the hero course. Not to mention they were all sent in at the same time. Nezu would recognize this as a power move. The rat was pleased with the vigilante's thinking. He managed to avoid possible conflict, use his resources, and avoid the need to get a new computer, to which Nezu had no doubt that the vigilante had by now. By the time Nezu finished skimming through the wave of emails, a new email was sent into his mailbox. From Mustafu City Library. Laughing face. Nice try using the recorded exams to upload the first virus. Oh, I think I just got super lucky using this computer. Here's a copy of calculations for Shinso Hitoshi. I copied clips from the exam, marking the exact scoring rubric you've so helpfully supplied on my first trip into UA. I decided to use the exact minimum scores. But you and I both know he should have gotten 64 points. I expect his hero course acceptance letter to arrive shortly. 42 attachments. Nezu felt his eye twitch. A new manic grin spread across his face. Shinso, how the hell did you do that? Izuku, do what? Shinso, 1 attachment. Image of UA acceptance letter with a hologram of Eraserhead beside it. Izuku, oh, you got into UA? That's awesome. Shinso, what did you even do? Izuku, you took the test. Not my problem. They just messed up your score. Shinso, how did you know he said that? Izuku, we should celebrate. Where do you want to go? Shinso, hello? TF did you do? Izuku, how about the mall? It kinda crowded. Let's go to a cafe. Location sent. Shinso, bruh. Izuku, if you want to watch the exams, we kinda have to go to the library. Nezu put a virus on the hard drive I uploaded the video to, so it's on one of the computers over there. Arn. Shinso, context? Izuku, when do you want to meet up? I'm free later this month. Let's say the last Saturday of this month. Shinso, I'm free too, but I SRSOY. You set off my principal? Izuku, okay cool. Let's meet up at the cafe and we can go from there. Shinso,